If you haven't hit subscribe yet, please do so. I appreciate it. Give the video a thumbs up. You appreciate the content. Now more than ever, you better hit notifications because the way news is coming out these days, who knows when the next shoe's going to drop and there's going to be news and we need to do a show right away. Whether Notre Dame joins a conference, doesn't, whatever it is, there's going to be something to discuss. Twitter, search bar, Always Irish, or at Always Irish Inc. Emails, alwaysirishindy@gmail.com. Audio only anywhere you want me. Call in line. The lines are open. 312-900-8815. That's what today is for, folks. Notre Dame fans and general college football fans. You don't have to be a Notre Dame fan to call in or opine or to put in the live chat what you think or want Notre Dame to do. So mainly, I have two questions, okay? Two main questions. One, what do you guys think Notre Dame's going to do? And what do you want Notre Dame to do? Those may be one and the same. They may not be the same at all. At all. Okay? Those are not the same thing. What you think they're going to do versus what you want them to do. Seems like the entire country's waiting to see what Notre Dame's going to do. Other dominoes waiting to fall depending on what Notre Dame wants to do. All of that seems like it's depending on Notre Dame and their decisions. I understand today, I guess there's some sort of half-ass alliance between the ACC and the Pac-12. That's shaky ground to me. I mean, I get it. You got to do what you got to do to try and insulate and protect yourself as much as you can. But this alliance sounds pretty casual to me. So I guess that's survival mode, if that's true with the ACC Pac-12. I don't know what to think. It's just wild. And how I stated when the news first broke of all this, I think the options here for Notre Dame are very direct at this point. I think it's very direct. One option is Jack gets up there, says, we decided as Notre Dame, we're going to stay independent for now. Okay. None of these changes take effect for a few years. We're going to stay independent and we're going to see what the atmosphere and the conditions are like in a year or two. And then we're happy to revisit this discussion and see where everybody's at that point. That is option number one for Jack. Just stay pat, say you're going to watch and be apprised and see what transpires, revisit this, see where you're at when this all gets closer to coming to fruition. Or number two, Jack can put on his lawyer hat, negotiate the hell out of this with the Big Ten, get a whole bunch of concessions for Notre Dame, and say now's the time. And the way Jack is, here's the thing, guys. Jack's a lawyer, okay? And he works at Notre Dame. Those are two groups of people that know how to polish something up and present it, if I ever saw it. Captain Jack and Notre Dame, right? So I could 100% see Jack getting up at a podium, saying we're joining the Big Ten, and saying to you, Notre Dame people, saying to you, this is an arrangement where we're able to maintain the things we value and not sacrifice that. That's going to be the line if Notre Dame does this. And Jack's going to get up there and say, we could still have a national schedule, have the LA market, the Chicago market, the New York market. We got it all covered. We could still have our biggest rivalry, USC, every year, no problem. We could renew the rivalries with the Big Ten schools. You could do all that. Have the same playoff access as all these teams without a bunch of extra hurdles to jump through. Okay. And oh, by the way, if the numbers are right, you're looking at 75 or 80 million more per year. If they do this, Jack's going to get up there and tell you, whether you believe it or not, he's going to tell you, Mr. Notre Dame fan, now is the time because we are not having to give up the things we value the most. National schedule. Okay, all of that, the national schedule, your rivalries, all that kind of stuff, playoff access where you don't have to win a bunch of extra games, go through these hurdles, all of that. So that's going to be the angle. If they do this. It'll be, we're able to maintain our values. We're not compromising that much, except for other than the label of being independent that we all love and grew up with. It's just a part of your fabric if you're a Notre Dame person. Okay. It just is. It's just a part of the fabric of who we are, is that independence. So giving that up in label would be kind of hard. It just, talking to people that aren't Notre Dame fans about this, they think I'm crazy. They think I'm crazy. I did a whole bunch of shows with Pigskin Pete, who has the Clemson channel, a couple summers ago, and we talked about this. He thought I was, you just don't get it unless you're a Notre Dame guy. This addiction to that independence and what that means. The anger of what started the independence with Michigan's Fielding Yost, blackballing Notre Dame, anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant. Nobody's allowed to schedule Notre Dame. All of this stuff is woven into the fabric of our Notre Dame families. And it's just uncomfortable to think you're not going to have that little thing that makes you different than everybody else. That's tough. That's tough to give up. What's also tough is staying independent if it makes it almost impossible for you to reach your goals. That's hard too. Nobody likes that either. Nobody likes that either. I see these tweets. Oh, I see people calling in, getting on the lines here. They're filling up. We'll get to the calls in a minute. So here's the thing. I see these tweets, and they'll just say, retweet this if you want Notre Dame to remain independent. I see a lot of that the last few days. Retweet this if you want Notre Dame to stay independent. Well, it's like I read that. Yes, I want Notre Dame to stay independent, but there are conditions to it. Like, yes, I want Notre Dame to stay independent if they could still play a competitive schedule, play all over the country, and have fair playoff access and make enough money to be able to compete with all these other teams. If all those conditions are met, then yeah, stay independent. It's not as simple as just saying, if you want Notre Dame to stay independent, retweet. Obviously, most people do, but only if you can still compete and win championships doing it that way. That's the existential question here. And not only existential, financial. It's weird. You have the existentialness of what we are and what independence means to this fan base and to my family and your family. And then you also have the practical side of, why are you going to let Rutgers make $100 million a year and you're making 20? And how can you expect to compete with facilities, paying your assistants, all the structure that goes into having that kind of income Notre Dame doesn't have? I got other news for you guys. And this isn't news for me because I'm not tied into this level. Pete Sampson, everybody knows Pete Sampson respects his college football Notre Dame work. Pete Sampson, earlier in the week, I heard him say on a podcast, Notre Dame's athletic department revenue is not what fans think it is. Fans are under the impression a lot of times that all that money that the football team brings in pays for stuff on campus and scholarships for regular students and this and that. Pete Sampson was saying it's actually the opposite. And with the pandemic, that hurt even more, that whole gap year. But he said it's the opposite, where you're ending up with the school paying a lot of that, not the other way around. So that's an interesting dynamic I didn't even know all the details of. But that athletic department isn't printing money the way a lot of people assumed or thought that it was. So I think this is really, really interesting. Playing the devil's advocate, it's like, we don't want to join the Big Ten. The Big Ten, I don't like that idea. I liked it a lot less 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago than I like it now because the dynamics have changed. Asking John, should we join the Big Ten 3 years ago, you're going to get a different answer to me than you are today. Okay? Because the dynamics have changed. And I just don't think Notre Dame has to sacrifice that much to do this. For all the reasons I just stated. Still get the national schedule. Still get your rivalries. Get to rekindle some old ones in the Big Ten. Playoff access, TV money, all of that. What are you really losing? That's how Notre Dame's going to frame this. What are you really losing if you do this under this dynamic, other than that label of being the independent team? That's it. I will bring up the same philosophical question I brought up the other day on my show. I love tradition. It's a big part of Notre Dame fandom. Love it. Absolutely love it. Okay. At what point does holding on to your old traditions prevent you from making any new ones? That is a question only Notre Dame's leadership can answer. It's a competitive one. It's a financial one. It's looking at the big picture. It's looking at not 3 years down the road, but 30. There's a lot involved here. There's a lot involved here. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Jack says we're going to stand pat, reevaluate where we're at in a couple years, see where we're at. Now, the argument against that is, I've seen people say Notre Dame needs to strike now if they want to leverage all this for the best TV deal and the best, negotiations with the Big Ten and all that. They need to strike now. I get that opinion. But if Jack called timeout on this for a year or two and revisited it, here's what I'm starting to think. If he goes that path, what you are losing in negotiative leverage by waiting a year or two, you would lose some of that. You may not be able to extort as much as you want, make the Big Ten pay your ACC exit deal. Tell them, hey, if we're interested in doing this and we're helping you out with our big gold dome and all of our fan base around the entire world, guess what? Rutgers isn't getting the same cut of the pie as Notre Dame is. They're not. So if you want us, we're getting a bigger cut of that Big Ten deal than Rutgers. Figure it out. They're not worth as much as we are. It's just a fact. Like, there's all these leverage games Jack could play if he did it now. If he didn't, what you're losing in some of that leverage, you would be gaining in the category of knowing what you're getting into. Clarity, okay? So if there's a called timeout on this for a year or two from Swarbrick, yes, you lose some of that negotiative leverage, but you gain clarity. Because by the time you're looking to jump in, you would be one of the final pieces to the conference puzzle, and you'll know the dynamic and what you're walking into. You might even know what the playoff structure is going to look like then. That's another big part of this. Oh, John, do you want Notre Dame to stay independent? Well, yeah, I do, but I'd also like to know what the playoff format's going to look like and how we're going to be able to get in it. So it's like, it's really easy to just say, do you want to be independent? Well, yes, but ... I got a bunch of questions. Like, what good is it to say we're independent, but then you can never win a championship? Like, how happy does that make you? Yeah, you're independent, but you can't financially compete enough to have what you need to win these days because of it. At that point, what's your independence good for? Because you're not. So this is all tricky. There's a lot of nuance. I am still pushing back on the idea that people are saying Notre Dame's under a ton of pressure right now to do something right now. I don't think that. I don't think that at all. So I think they could sit back for another year or two, you could play this, you could leverage other conferences, you could do all that. You could ask for the world. What in the world is this in the chat? Jesus. That is inappropriate. Man, whoo, that was either a bot or something else. Nick Dean, I appreciate that. Nick Dean says, we got to go for the money, and then he throws Always Irish a $20 bill. Maybe they're going for your money, Nick. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Chanel Flip 1099. I appreciate this. Thanks for jumping in. Hey, John, what if ND surprised everybody enjoying the SEC? The revenues would be astronomical. Bringing SEC teams South Bend and the Chicago market would be crazy. Here's the thing. I really appreciate the donation, Flip, by the way. That's a really good question. Here's one answer I know for sure. One answer I know for sure is all of these conferences would want and will accept Notre Dame. The SEC included. They will want and accept Notre Dame because of the brand, because of the following, the TV numbers, the attendance, all of the stuff that goes with that worldwide Notre Dame fan base. They would all want him, okay? There's no doubt the SEC and the Big Ten are the two big ones. I just tend to think there's so much more history and so much more that lines up with Notre Dame in the Big Ten, even academically with a lot of those institutions. I know you got Vanderbilt, but academically they line up with more of those institutions in the Big Ten footprint, and that's a big deal to Notre Dame when it comes to these kind of decisions. But all these conferences want Notre Dame. So Notre Dame can leverage the SEC all you want. I just personally think for a lot of reasons that the geographical, academic, historically, that the Big Ten makes more sense. Also, it is not lost on me that USC's in the Big Ten. And no one's going to tell me, you could tell me, but I'm not going to believe you, that a part of the Big Ten's interest in USC is not to leverage and appeal to Notre Dame. I refuse to believe that was not a part of this at all, that they all just did this out of goodwill for USC. I am convinced to some extent this is an enticement for Notre Dame. Like, we know you don't want to give up USC. That's a big deal. We know USC doesn't want to give up playing Notre Dame. Now you don't have that problem. And it also solves the problem of not being coast to coast, because you would have at least a couple California markets. Okay. So ultra interesting. I am starting to think, and I've been saying this for a while, this conference stuff is now getting to where I'm thinking it's more of a matter of when, not if. And if it's just purely financial, there's no decision to be made. It's over. If that was it, purely financial, it's not a contest. You're going into a conference. Those numbers are not compatible. They're not even in the ballpark of the NBC deal and what you're looking at from the Big Ten deal in a few years. They're not in the same ballpark. Can Notre Dame financially afford to fall behind all those other football factories by 3, 4, 5 times over? Can you? Can you afford to do that? That's the question I have of, oh, do you want Notre Dame to be independent? Well, yeah, but only if we could still win. Only if we could still win and that's viable, then yes. Also, what happens at these playoffs? What happens when the dust settles on this big realignment? What happens when the powers that be sit in that room, put together the new playoff and go, Notre Dame, here's the deal. If you're not in one of these, you're not in the playoff. Well, then I guess there's no decision to be made. You go make $100 million a year with the Big Ten, and you play USC and Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, Wisconsin, renewed rivalry with Purdue, all that, Michigan State. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I'd like to know what you guys think. And again, what you want to happen and what you think are going to happen are two totally different things. We got a couple good calls here. 574. I believe that's local to the South Bend area. 574. 574. Who we got?
Hey, John, it's Kevin. How are you?
What's up, Kevin? What do you think of all this? Where do you think this is headed?
Well, I think I'm going to break it down even a little further for you. I think short term, barring any crazy wild shift in the whole conference realignment picture, I think Notre Dame's just going to stay the status quo. They're going to keep their independent status. The NBC contract runs through 2025, so you've got at least another 3 years. I think it's 2024 or 2025, the Big Ten and some of the other conferences renegotiate their TV network deals. But I just don't see Notre Dame making a rapid jump unless something crazy happens. Now, what I think will happen eventually, I think Notre Dame's going to end up joining the Big Ten. I just think that when money talks, you got to answer that call. And I'm with you on what you had mentioned earlier about Pete Sampson. A lot of people think that Notre Dame is just so filthy rich, and they could basically print money and it's of no value. And I disagree with that. I think that Notre Dame does have some issues. When you talk about the billions of dollars that the Big Ten network could be getting from Fox, or another conference getting from another TV network, and then you compare that to what Notre Dame's getting from their NBC deal, which I'm not saying Notre Dame couldn't renegotiate with NBC for a higher payout, but it certainly isn't going to be anywhere close to what the Big Ten could offer. I think up until just the last couple weeks here, I think Notre Dame was on course for a slow, gradual transition into the ACC as a full-time member. I felt that there was a cultural shift with the university, with the academics, aligning quite well with a lot of the ACC schools. But, I love a good conspiracy theory, just like a lot of people do. And I'm kind of in agreement with you. I think that there may have been some enticement or some, backdoor dealings that perhaps, the Big Ten says to the USC, hey, if you join us, maybe we'll get Notre Dame to come along at some point. I think right now the Big Ten makes the better choice in the long term compared to the ACC, being that, like you said, you can play across the country with the Big Ten footprint. You're going to hit the three biggest TV markets in the country, that being New York, Chicago, and LA. So you can play your, national schedule, if you will. That being said, personally, I'm more of a traditional guy. I like tradition, but I'm not so hooked into tradition that I'm not willing to evolve and progress with tradition. I think you can marry tradition and progress together. I think a lot of people get so hooked and caught up in the idea of, this is the way it's been for the last 100+ years, and it's the way it's going to be forever and ever. And I mean, look at what happened with Notre Dame with the stadium expansion back in '97. Notre Dame expanded. It really upset a lot of the older Notre Dame fan base. But in all honesty, it was in the best interest of the program. And then when they did the expansion here just a few years back, they added the video board, they added the field turf, all those things, I'm not saying that Notre Dame sold their soul, but you have to evolve if you want to get big-time recruits. And I know that that's kind of a fuzzy subject there, because a lot of it depends on the coach and the personality and the scheme that they're trying to implement. But, kids today can be very material, and they want to go where they're going to get the best publicity. They want to go where they're going to be able to perform the best. And so I'm just saying, Notre Dame, I would love to stay independent, but I think the winds of change are sweeping through, and from a financial perspective, they're going to be pushed into it if they want to be able to compete at a high level and be viable for a national championship.
I think you bring up a really good point about trying to marry tradition and being modern enough to be in the mix, to be able to truly compete. And I think that's where this gets tricky. Like, where is that tipping point and that line to where the powers that be at Notre Dame feel that the sea changes are to a point where if they don't make some sort of move, they're not going to be able to compete, or it's going to be significantly harder to be able to compete. And I don't know where that line is. And I don't know if it's a competitive one, a strictly financial one. I don't know that. And I feel like that where Notre Dame's leadership is at on that dynamic, we don't know. We're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And I think we would all be very naive at this point right now today to not believe that there is at least some sort of footsies being played with Notre Dame and either the ACC or the Big Ten, or who knows, it could be even another conference such as the SEC. I mean, I'm sure Savvy Jack is at least, pushing forward with some kind of ideas or maybe some sort of preeminent, negotiation just to kind of get a temperature and a feel for where things kind of stand. Because, Notre Dame, as well as a lot of schools, they're not ones to usually be kept or get caught off guard when it comes to these sorts of shifts. These are things that are usually well orchestrated months and perhaps even years in advance. Like the Texas and Oklahoma deal to the SEC. That was negotiated 6 months prior until it became public knowledge, until it was broken, through the media stream. So, there could be possibly some gears moving behind that panel.
Yeah, and it does. I had this conversation on the phone earlier today with somebody. Whatever we know publicly that we're seeing from these media reports and all that, whatever we know, I'm confident Jack knows a lot more. Maybe Jack has more information about the proposed structure of what a playoff would look like once this is done. Maybe they're further down that road than we know. I don't know that, so that's something where, maybe the powers that be are further down this path than we are. Let me ask you this. Has your opinion of if you're open to the Big Ten, how much has it changed since the USC announcement? How big of a deal did that make to you in your mind to be like, you know what? This doesn't seem as bad as it did 4 years ago. How big of a deal is that shifting dynamic to you in your mind?
Well, to be honest with you, I was born and raised here in South Bend, and I currently live here in South Bend. So, obviously I'm right in the heart of Big Ten country, and ever since I was a little boy growing up and watching football on Saturdays, I've always been exposed to that Big Ten, presence. And, I've always felt that Notre Dame belongs more in the Big Ten than the ACC. However, I understood why Notre Dame chose to have a quasi-relationship with the ACC in terms of football from the standpoint of the exposure as far as the footprint goes. You get to be in the New York scene. You can be down through the Carolinas, into Florida, to Georgia. Those are all hotbeds of recruiting. And, if you can go into those markets and bring your product to those fields and perform well, you're going to snap up, some very talented, high caliber athletes in theory, at least. But, obviously Notre Dame here in Indiana really doesn't fit too well geographically with the ACC print. So that's why I said, when Notre Dame announced that relationship back in, I think it was 2014 or 2015, I really didn't like it, but I understood it from a logistics standpoint. But with your question being mentioned, I like where things are going as far as with Notre Dame and USC potentially at some point being together in the same conference in the Big Ten. It shifted the needle quite a bit for me that, I'm not saying I want to just right away go ahead and sign on that dotted line and join the Big Ten, but it's basically flipped the needle from one side to the other. At this point, I don't want Notre Dame in the ACC if they're to join a conference. Yeah, I want them to join the Big Ten if they have to. If it becomes a point where they want to be competitive at an elite level, they have to join the Big Ten. That's where I want it to go if need be. I really don't like the idea of joining the Big Ten, but, again, if you have to, you have to.
Yeah, and that's my position is, yeah, I would prefer to stay independent, but only if that doesn't push us to where the odds of winning a championship are next to nothing because there's all these extra hurdles, blocked access. can't can't put together a schedule competitive enough. Like, there's all these different blockades I could see coming, depending on the powers that be. But I admit the USC news makes me not look at this with the disgust I used to look at joining the Big Ten. It just changes things. It's our number one rival, and it instantly gives you that coast to coast appeal that Notre Dame always values and that I don't want to give up. And so I'm with you. If we had to join a conference and it's between the ACC and the Big Ten excites me 100% more than the ACC does for a lot of reasons. History, a lot of reasons.
Well, I'll tell you another thing too. I got two more things to mention at least. One is, I'm sure you're probably aware of the rumors that supposedly the Big 12 is talking with the Pac-12 or Pac-10, whatever you want to call it, with the reduction of USC and UCLA. There's supposedly talks underway about merging the Big 12 and the Pac-12. You know, so if that happens, you're going to have this massive conference, you know, which, I mean, that could change dynamics tremendously for Notre Dame, depending on how other conferences react. You know, who knows if the ACC is even going to be around? I mean, you know, the SEC could go up into ACC country. They could snag Florida State. They could snag Miami. They could obviously go after Clemson, which, you know, in my opinion, would be the jewel, at least right now, of the ACC.
Yep.
You know, I mean, the ACC is not immune to being, you know, basically poached.
Yeah. No, I don't like that. I don't listen. The ACC, the Pac-12, and the Big 12. If I'm a team in those conferences, I'm nervous. This alliance sounds like it's kind of like a non-committal alliance, like for now, so that we can survive and then hopefully figure something out. Is kind of what it sounds like to me, like a temporary agreement. So we could keep going till we figure out the longer term picture. I don't know, but it makes me nervous. And if I'm a fan of teams in those conferences not named Clemson, Miami, Florida State, who I think the SEC would be smart to try and go after and grab, that would make me nervous, that alliance. I don't like that. So if, to me, Notre Dame, I think the ACC is, I think that dream's out. ACC, people that want Notre Dame in, I think that's over.
Oh, I think so too. I really don't see Notre Dame joining the ACC, barring some wild, crazy thing happening. The other point I was going to mention for you, John, is, you know, what are the odds that supposedly Jack Swarbrick isn't in talks with the Big Ten right now, negotiating this tremendous buyout of the grant of rights agreement with the ACC? You know, maybe he's going to use that as leverage against the Big Ten, being that the Big Ten is the wealthiest conference in D1 college football.
Why wouldn't he? You know, why wouldn't he leverage that? That is the number one thing I would do. And I'm not even a lawyer, and I know that is try and leverage that. That's smart as hell.
Right. I'm just going to say, you know, the Big Ten certainly has the cabbage to pay for it. I don't know what the financial amount of that agreement is. I don't know if that was ever made public. But, I mean, you know, it's a big, big sum of money. And, you know, obviously some of the lower tier schools in the ACC would never be able to afford it. Maybe even the big tier and even the upper tier wouldn't even be able to afford it. And perhaps even Notre Dame couldn't afford it. But I'm just saying, you know, Notre Dame knows where they're at. They are the girl that doesn't have a prom date that everybody wants to take to prom.
Yep.
And it's Notre Dame's picking at this point, you know.
But Kevin, look at this. I think I read a tweet that said it was around $150 million for that ACC buyout. If they're looking at potential revenue of $100 million per team soon for the Big Ten, that's a no-brainer to me. Even if you didn't get the Big Ten to pick up some of the bill, that's 1.5 years, and then you're making $80 million more a year than you were for the rest of the time after that. That's a no-brainer to me, even if you don't get some help on the buyout. That's 1.5 years, and then you're making $80 million more a year in perpetuity after that. That's math so simple, I can do it.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. If you're looking at it from a financial perspective, there's a lot of money to be made for Notre Dame here if they tread carefully and make the right decision. The thing I think Notre Dame has to be very careful about is, Notre Dame is obviously the one that everybody wants, but Notre Dame, knowing that, has to be careful not to over leverage themselves to the point where they just scare everybody away too, I think.
I'm not worried about that. I do not think that would ever happen. I don't. I just think people want money and they know Notre Dame brings money. So I say, ask for the world. Ask for the world. The most they could say is no, but none of these conferences are going to say, Notre Dame, we're not interested anymore. Or the clock ran out. We're moving on to Washington instead of Notre Dame. No. Even if the Big Ten.
Yeah, I agree with it from that standpoint.
They're not going to do it. Even if they said, we're only taking 20 teams and it's got to be, by the end of this summer, I don't care what they say. If Notre Dame goes back to the Big Ten in a year or two and says, we want to join, they're going to say, let's do it. That's great leverage.
So let me ask you this, though. Okay, that's kind of where I was going with my whole point was, okay, obviously right now there's that fraction of people that thinks Notre Dame has to make a move right now. I mean, you're either in or you're out. I mean, you got to jump on it.
Yep.
And obviously you and I are in agreement. We don't believe that is the case.
I do not.
I think, right, exactly. And so what I'm saying is I think what I'm saying by Notre Dame has to be careful not to over leverage themselves is that, okay, perhaps maybe the terms of an agreement now might be better than, say, the terms of an agreement 2 or 3 or 4 years from now, whatever time frame you choose.
Okay, now wait. I agree with you, but I'm going to give you a comeback to that. Okay, I thought of this. And here's how I'm looking at this. I think Notre Dame's in the best position to leverage these conferences for the best deal now. By far, now is their best chance to negotiate and use leverage. However, if they wait a year or two, they are going to lose some negotiative leverage. But what they will gain will be clarity, because they will be one of the final pieces to this puzzle. And a lot of the questions we have will already be answered. And sure, you may not get as much money, but we would also know exactly what we're jumping into, exactly what the dynamic is. We would know what the playoff format's going to be like. So you're going to give up some leverage, but you're not going to be in as risky of a position to dive into something fully before you know all the details. So I think there is a give take there. Financially, right now is best time for leverage, no doubt. Peace of mind and clarity on where this is going, 1 or 2 years would be better. Which of those is most palatable to Jack? How aggressive do they want to be? I don't know. So, but you're on the right track. I'm seeing it the same way you are. But I think there's a give and take here of comfort and the dynamic. And I don't know. So where do you think this is going to end up and when?
Where do I think this is going to end up when?
Yeah, are you thinking this summer, or do you really expect Notre Dame to let this chill and wait another year or two?
Oh, I think, in all honesty, it's probably going to settle for about another year. I think if anything's going to happen, you're probably going to hear about it a year from now. I just don't see Notre Dame making a decision anytime in the next 5 or 6 months. I really don't. I mean, like I said, that's all subject to change. I mean, if tomorrow, the ACC comes out and says, or, the SEC comes out and says that, hey, we're acquiring Florida State, Miami, Clemson, the Big 12 and the Big 12 and the Pac-12 merge together, and you start seeing a mega super conference form on the West Coast, and you see on the Eastern Seaboard, and then, if things like that start happening, I think Notre Dame has to make a decision much sooner. But I just don't think things are going to happen that rapidly. I think right now you're kind of in that little cool down phase, and you're kind of letting things settle a little bit. I think negotiations by a lot of different schools and athletic directors and conference commissioners are going on behind closed doors. I certainly believe that. But I mean, look at last year. It was about a year ago at this time when, the SEC announced that Oklahoma and Texas were joining them. And, we went almost a year before we heard any other conference realignment news. So, people, I think, tend to freak out and think things are just going to fall overnight. And I think things play out on a much longer scale of time, in most cases anyway.
Yep. And you know what I think would be the funniest thing about this? It's dominating all the news headlines, all the college football shows, websites, blogs, YouTubers. We're all talking about it. The funniest thing to me would be if Jack wants to let it cool and you just never hear nothing. There's no press conference announcing we're not doing something. They're just going to move on. And then the story just kind of is going to just fizzle away. Like, Jack doesn't have to get up there and announce we're not changing anything. If they're not making a move yet, he doesn't have to say a word. And then everybody's just kind of waiting, and then it'll just kind of fizzle out. Then we'll get in this season and everybody will be distracted by that. Then in the off season, it'll come back up again. That's the funniest part to me. Jack could just not say anything and we just keep it moving.
Well, I'll tell you another thing, John. You and I have both been around the block long enough to know that you're in the dog days of summer when you go on any kind of like ESPN, you go on CBS Sports, whatever, and you see the article, is it time for Notre Dame to join the conference? You see articles like that. It happens every single year. I can't think of one year, with the exception of maybe the COVID year, just because Notre Dame ended up going to the ACC for that 1 year agreement.
You're right.
But,
there's a lot more smoke this time. There's a lot more smoke this time. Legitimate smoke.
Right. Oh, I agree. But I'm just saying, that has been a headline every year in the off season, usually around July or late June, when you see articles like that, is it time? And you read all these articles and, all these authors lay out why they think Notre Dame should join. And some of them are legitimate. Some of them I think are, anti-Notre Dame, whatever. But the thing is, again, back to my main point, I don't think anything happens immediately here in the next 6 or 7 months. I think if anything's going to happen, pencil it in June or July of next year. And that's only if there isn't anything major as far as conference realignment goes here in the near term. However, I think if you're talking within the next 5 years, I think Notre Dame will make an announcement that they will join the Big Ten. I don't think, personally, I don't like that, but I understand it if it's for the right reasons. If it's for a financial reason in order to stay viable. I mean, how can you compete at the highest level and continue to garner high-ranked recruits and be able to upgrade your facilities to perform at a high level if you're being outraced and outlapped and outgunned by, Big Ten schools like Rutgers, who will be getting 3 or 4 times what you're getting from NBC, and you're a better program from top to bottom. I mean, it just doesn't equate to success.
And that's my big question. Where is that tipping point, and how close are we to it, in the opinion of the decision makers at Notre Dame? I think ultimately that's the big measurement here.
Well, and like I said earlier, I think you could feel the cultural shift over the last 10 years with the Notre Dame administration, that they're kind of, growing on the idea prior to the USC news of eventually joining the ACC. I think it was kind of one of those deals where it was like a shotgun wedding, but they were at least thinking about it.
Yeah.
Whereas prior, you mentioned any conference membership. No, we're not interested. But, obviously the USC news is a huge dynamic that changes a lot of things about this. And, who knows? Like you said in one of your earlier videos, the financial situation doesn't work out so well, at least with the way things are going right now. If there's a new athletic director in the next several years, like the rumors are suggesting there could be, maybe the new athletic director is going to say, you know what, enough of this $15 million a year. Let's go for a bigger piece of the pie. I mean, there's just so many moving parts and pieces to it, which complicates the decision making, which means you need more clarity. And that's why I say I don't expect anything anytime soon.
Yep. And I think I couldn't blame Jack if he went that way. I would have absolutely no problem with it at all. The only thing is, as Notre Dame fans, you kind of want to just get settled and know what your deal is. So there would just be this underlying kind of uncomfortable feeling of knowing we're doing what we're doing, but is it going to be forever? So we'll just have to navigate that. But Kevin, thanks for the call. Call again. Really good thoughts. I appreciate it.
Yeah. One more thing real quick here before I go.
Yeah.
I want to say this. The thing that puts so much pressure on this whole storyline is that Notre Dame has so much to gain, and at the very same time, they could lose a lot. And what I mean by that is once you give up independence, once you join a conference, once you basically void the NBC deal, I understand Notre Dame's leverage and things, but it'll never, ever be the same. If, let's say, things don't work out and they say, you know what, we want to go back to independence. I'm just saying it won't feel the same. I
get what you're saying. I'm just telling you, I have a hard time feeling like somebody who got an $80 million a year raise is going to end up not liking it. I just have a feeling it's going to work out. If they're really going to end up making $80 million more a year than they are now, I think they'll find a way to be comfortable with it. That would be my guess.
All righty. Well, very well. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care, Kevin. Call again. Great call.
You bet, man.
Take care. All right. Good call by Kevin. I got a Mike Norris here on the chat. Says Big Ten shares money equally. If you don't like that, go pound sand and play with Kansas State, Pitt, Oregon State. Same thing with the SEC. Okay, the Big Ten pays money equally. That doesn't mean I can't ask for more than Rutgers. That doesn't mean Jack can't blow in that room and go, have you ever been in a negotiation? You start a lot higher than what you'll actually accept, figuring it's going to have to be pared down. That's how negotiations work. Oh, I get that they share it equally. I could walk in there as Notre Dame and go, the hell with that. It makes no sense. We're worth more. We bring in more money to you. Why should we make the same as them? I'm not saying it's going to work, but I'm saying when you have leverage, use it. Use it. Mike also doesn't think the Big Ten would pay some of that exit fee to the ACC. Maybe they won't. But it's one of the first things I'm bringing up to them as a requirement for us to join the Big Ten. Like, I'm not saying these are absolutes that if they don't happen, we're not going to do it. But this is all a negotiation. And so I'm starting with a bunch of items that I might be willing to concede on financially, somewhere in the middle, whatever. But when you're in the position Jack Swarbrick is in this week, you shoot for the freaking moon. Shoot for the moon. And it's like, well, that's not the way things go. It's a conference and we're independent. So sorry, I don't know what that's like. So I'm blowing into town with our value and our brand. And we're going to get as much as we could try and get. That's as American as can be. There's nothing wrong with that. So they could say no all they want. But if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So I'm not saying those are must-haves for Notre Dame to do this, but I'm saying those are a couple of the things I'm asking for right away. Is a bigger money share than the crappy teams weighing down the conference that bring no value at all. And I want some of that ACC bill paid. I just do. Oh, let's see what else we got here. Good point on the NBC contract. Backroom issue, maybe the NBC desiring some games. Listen, maybe this is just me and I'm being a jerk, but I had this conversation this morning with somebody. I don't care about NBC. I don't particularly think the product for Notre Dame games is that good. I don't think we've had announcers that I love that are Notre Dame guys that I can't live without. I didn't appreciate being forced into the Peacock failed streaming attempt by NBC. And they held us all ransom to keep that going and making us watch that game there. I don't care about NBC. Pay them off too. Like, it's not that great of a product, in my opinion. The Notre Dame NBC product. It doesn't do that much for me to any extent that I'm going to miss it if Notre Dame's a part of the Big Ten TV network and not NBC. That's my opinion. Maybe you guys see it different. Oh, we got another 574 South Bend caller. 574, who we got?
This is James.
What's going on? How do you see all of this?
Well, I see that there's more factors than just football. One, you have to also consider the Olympic sports. Yes, lacrosse and hockey are sports at Notre Dame. You got to consider that if the Irish were to go to the SEC, for example, if the Irish would leave the ACC, they would be in no lacrosse conference, meaning that they would have to join another conference like the Big Ten. And that won't happen because it would be like the Big Ten offering you a big deal and then giving them the middle of finger, but still expecting to join the conference, and it won't happen that way.
Yep,
They won't be able to join.
And that is another big consideration, not only just for Notre Dame, but like for these other teams. Think about it now. You have like USC, and it's like all these like non-big revenue generating sports gotta fly all the way across the country to go play, you know, whatever sport it is, and all that travel and all the logistics and all that scheduling. And I feel like that is a part of this that is getting overlooked a lot, even by people like me, because you're looking at the big, shiny, biggest object. How do you figure out all of that scheduling and how that all shapes up the Olympic sports? Like, it's interesting to me how we have Notre Dame independent, we have most everything else in the ACC, but Notre Dame's men's hockey's in the Big Ten. So that's weird already.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's why Notre Dame will probably join the Big Ten because their hockey team is already in there. And if they were to join a conference now, I think Notre Dame is right now waiting because, again, they probably don't want to leave the ACC unless Duke, North Carolina, or any of those teams start leaving to join another conference because, again, the other sports, they have to consider that.
Yep, that's a good point and a good consideration. And I'll be honest with you. I feel like that's going to maybe be one of the negatives of this for some of the non-revenue generating sports is it's going to be a nightmare for travel and logistics. And the other thing is, I know a lot of people don't care about this. Some of us do. Academically, you got to fly all the way across the country, be gone longer. Like, there's a lot of logistics in there. And so there's a lot to consider. Let me ask you, did the acquisition of USC change your mind on being more open to this, knowing you wouldn't lose that rivalry, or did that or not?
The Big Ten acquiring USC, it did change my mind a little bit about them joining a conference. I mean, because obviously you would play USC because that would obviously be a protected rivalry.
Mm-hmm.
But again, there's like more factors too. You have to also protect the rivalry against Michigan State and Purdue. The problem is you can't play all those teams because you know they're going to want to rotate the schedules like to play every team eventually. So you don't know how that rotation is going to work, and also how the conference championship game is going to work because that's very important on how you make the playoffs as of right now. Unless they expand it to 8 teams, then which everyone's talking about. So we don't know what that's going to happen because they might expand to 8, 16, 12, or more teams. We don't know what's going to happen.
I would guess you would have little pods, maybe regional pods where you would play the same 4 or 5 teams every year guaranteed and then have a rotation with the other ones. That's one way to set it up. But again, it matters on the numbers. How many total members are we talking about? Like, what's that division? Are you going to do away with divisions in that conference altogether? Like, I don't know. And you bring up a good point. Those are all questions we don't have the answers to.
Yeah, because if you're only playing 8 teams too, if you're still playing non-conference football, we're going to be playing like teams like Tennessee State, like FCS teams. Also, is anyone going to go to watch the Tennessee State football game? I'm not. I guarantee you this. I'm going to be at that game, and then there's going to be 30,000 empty seats at that stadium. No one's going to Tennessee State, Notre Dame.
I was going to say, I see your phone number here. I know you're in South Bend. I was going to say, that's pretty harsh if you're in town and you're not even going to go down and watch it.
Yeah, because I could literally walk to the stadium from my house.
That's awesome. So, do you think this happens? And if so, when?
If they join a conference, it will definitely be after the expiration of the NBC contract and definitely after the second Clemson game. Because let's be honest, if we were to have a camera and spy on Jack Swarbrick, right now he's worried about hiring the baseball coach right now and about the Clemson game and making sure everyone can get in that game and what he's doing for the Clemson game and security and all that stuff. He's not worried about the conference breakup unless something drastic happens, like right now, as like, let's say, for example, Duke or North Carolina were to leave to join the SEC or something like that were to happen. Then the Irish might be more quicker to join the Big Ten. But right now, he's probably not worried. He's more worried about hiring the Watford coach to be our baseball head coach.
Yeah, I do wonder about that too. I was thinking about it over 4th of July weekend. We were all sitting there as Notre Dame people wondering, we're flipping burgers and, cooking out. And you're picturing Swarbrick in some war room, on the phone, crunching numbers, talking to the board member. What if he was just at home flipping burgers too, and this is nothing to him? He'll worry about it next year. Like, I don't know.
I don't know what Jack Swarbrick's doing. I guarantee everyone thinks he's in some war room, and then in reality, he's just sitting in his office reading a book right now.
Yeah, it's wild. I don't know. It's just crazy to me how fast things change in this business and this landscape. That USC news threw me for a loop, and my first thought was, this is a big ploy to entice Notre Dame to jump on the Big Ten bandwagon.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for the call. And I'll stop by and tailgate in your yard for the first home game next year, right up the street.
Yeah, maybe you should come by my house because I actually usher at the stadium, so I can't drink before the game, but you can definitely come over to my house after the game. I'm sure I'll have people over. That's
what I'm talking about. I'm writing down your number. I'll text you.
Yeah, you can text me if you want to.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the call. I'll meet up with you for a beer in South Bend.
All right.
Beautiful. Thanks for the call. Have a good evening.
Have a good day, everyone.
Take care. Okay, so I knew this was going to happen, and I wanted this to happen. Mike Norris doesn't like Notre Dame. The Freeman factor is going to be 0-2 pretty soon. Okay, so what? So what? That's my question. I'm getting sick of people saying this. Oh, Marcus is going to be 0-2. So freaking what? He went 0-1 in a bowl game with the other guy's half-ass roster and half the coaches figuring out their next job. Is that his fault? I don't think so. Then, Freeman's going to get exposed against Ohio State. Even if you get blown out against Ohio State, it's more of an indictment on the Brian Kelly recruiting regime than it is this guy, week 1, year 1, game 1. So all the people saying that when Freeman's 0-2, he's going to be exposed, that he doesn't have what it takes to be a good head coach, you're full of crap. You're full of crap, okay? I've said it before. I'm going to say it again right now. The exact reason so many Notre Dame people wanted Brian Kelly gone, the exact reason for that is now Marcus's problem against Ohio State. That reason, number one reason, doesn't recruit enough high-end talent to beat the good teams we play. That's the number one reason, okay? Just because Kelly's gone now doesn't mean that problem he caused is fixed yet. So if Freeman goes 0-2, I'm not listening to fans of other teams And I'm definitely not open to listening to Notre Dame fans call and say, John, this proves he's in over his head. No, it doesn't. It proves he's working with the roster the other guy built lazily. Now, 3 years from now, then you got a fair argument. Marcus Freeman losing games he shouldn't lose in a few years with his talent in there, with his coaches in there, with him having head coaching experience. Then we can have a talk about that. But if Marcus Freeman goes 0-2 to start all this, look down in the bayou and thank Brian Kelly for a roster with about 2 wide receivers. Okay? So I ain't listening to that. I'm just freaking not. The same reason you wanted that guy gone is Marcus's problem against Ohio State. The guy can't snap his fingers and flip half the roster, but he's damn well trying with these recruiting classes, but they're not here yet. I'm sick of this narrative. The same reason we all wanted that guy gone is the new guy's problem until he has time to dig out of it with elite recruiting. Okay? So I ain't open to our fans or anybody else. Oh, he's 0-2. He lost to one of the top 3 teams in the whole landscape. He's never going to learn how to be a head coach. No, I reject that flatly and outright. Okay? So whatever. I know what this is going to be. This is going to be, if he doesn't beat Ohio State, there's going to be idiots coming out of the woodwork from every direction. And most of them are going to be from my own fan base saying, John, what happened to your savior? This proves he's in over his head. No, it doesn't. It does not. Nothing. If it goes bad against Ohio State, am I going to pull from that and go, oh, man, I just don't think this guy's ever going to make it. He's never going to be able to be a head coach. He doesn't know what he's doing. Not going to say that. I'm not going to say that. Okay? Sterling Skins, he misses Michigan, pounding ND. Oh, let me guess. This is when you're going to say, what happened in 2019 when you came to the big house? We beat you by a lot. And then I go, why is your recruiting so bad? And even after your best year in 20, none of the best talent, even in the freaking state of Michigan, wants to go to your school. What happened to that? I don't know, but in 2019, we beat you guys at the big house. Hey, idiot, Sterling Skins, let me ask you this. Why, after your best year in 20 years, does nobody want to go to Michigan? It's a problem. It's a red flag, okay? You guys play nobody till October. Who do you got? Connecticut, Central this, Southern Junior College that, Hawaii, Maryland. You don't play a real team till October. And in any given year, Michigan plays 2 games, 2.5. Ohio State, that's 1 game. Michigan State, half a game if they're bad, full game if they're good, rivalry game. I'll give you 2 games, maybe 2.5 games a year. That's it. That's all they play. Look at their first month. It's an absolute, their first month schedule is offensive, and it shouldn't even be allowed. They don't play a real football program till October. It's hilarious. And it's so funny how they don't get when I talk about recruiting and why Notre Dame's kicking the shit out of Michigan in recruiting now after their best year in 20 for a lot of the guys that are overlapping. Notre Dame's won every recruiting battle. And I'll go, what about that? And they go, well, 2019. What does 2019 have to do with recruiting now that's going to impact future game scores? Those things are not related. And if they were related, think about this. If they were related and you want to brag on the last time you beat Notre Dame at the Big House in 2019, if that had any bearing at all, it should be flipped. If it was that big of a deal, then the recruits would be wanting to go to Michigan and not Notre Dame after that embarrassing beatdown. But it's not happening. And I can't wait. If we join the Big Ten and we end up playing them every year, I'm going to have a stroke on the air. Why do I keep getting these porn alerts in the chat? That seems inappropriate to me, does it not? Oh, who do we got? 831. 831. Who we got? Oh, who do we got? 831. 831.
Yeah.
What is this? California?
Tyler. Yeah, I was just living in California. I grew up in Iowa. I'm a Iowa Hawkeye, so Big Ten, went to school in Ohio, live in Michigan now. Definitely not a Michigan fan after that rant, so just so you know.
Interesting. So are you a Notre Dame fan or somebody else?
I'm a Big Ten fan. I'm a Iowa Hawkeye fan.
Okay, so I like this because I get a lot of calls, mostly from our Notre Dame people. I am very interested to hear how you see this as somebody outside of that circle. What do you make of all this?
Well, I am of the mind that, let's bring Notre Dame in. I know there's a lot of Big Ten people that are like, Notre Dame's snobby. Notre Dame just wants to be independent, all this stuff. But I think it would be an absolute huge thing for the Big Ten, for a lot of the points that you've already talked about with the rivalries and all that stuff. One question I had for you, this whole USC UCLA thing caught everybody off guard. Like, nobody knew this was happening. Who's to say that Jack Swarbrick wasn't already talking? He was in the talks with USC at the same time, and he already knew this was going to happen. And let's say, hey, tomorrow Notre Dame's going to announce, hey, we're joining the Big Ten, and USC. And because he wanted to have USC, have their week in the limelight. But people are talking about Notre Dame just as much as they're talking about USC, if not more, this week. So I could see it as a play of like, hey, let's get some media ourselves, and then we'll own, the next week as well when we come out and say we're joining the Big Ten too.
Yeah, it's just impossible to know how much or how little is actively going on behind the scenes. Like, it's just impossible to know. And I also wonder how much is already done that we, the public, just don't know about, but that the powers that be do. But let me ask this. This is the weird part of this dynamic. I totally understand some of the bitter rivalries with us in the Big Ten, and I have a very long history with Michigan and Michigan fans, and I don't like them. They don't like me. It's beautiful. But here's what's interesting is there's a lot of this like, oh, boo on Notre Dame, and okay, they make it to the playoff, and then they can't compete, and note all this. But at the same time, it's like a lot of those Big Ten people hate Notre Dame. I think deep down they all know it would be good for the Big Ten too, but they don't want to say it. But there's no way it wouldn't be a slam dunk home run for the conference to add Notre Dame. Do you agree with that, even as a non-Notre Dame guy?
Oh, for 100%. I think I've even seen that. My Twitter feed is a lot of Big Ten people, and I've seen a lot of it like, oh man, I can't stand Notre Dame, but you know what? I want them in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
So it's all over the place that I see Big Ten people saying that.
Yeah, so. And it's almost a perfect win for Big Ten fans of another team, because think of the dynamic you just said. You could be like, I hate Notre Dame, but I also want them in the Big Ten. Well, then that's awesome, because then your team's going to get to play Notre Dame. You can hate them for that week and enjoy the raised profile of the entire conference from having this historical brand geographically located in the middle of the Big Ten footprint. Like, that is a perfect scenario for the Big Ten. Like, this would be a grand slam home run edition for that conference. They should be thrilled if they can pull that off.
For sure. Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, USC is coming in, and there's a lot of talk that, okay, if Notre Dame is going to come, Stanford would be a good poll. Do you think there's weight with that? Like, does Notre Dame care? I mean, I know that's not as long standing or as like intense of a rivalry with Stanford, but I haven't just moved from California. I was an hour away from Stanford, and I had a friend who was a season ticket holder, but nobody goes to games there. So I just don't see the real pull, for Stanford. I know it's a rivalry. I know,
Here's
they're
my
both academically strong.
Yeah. Here's my interpretation of my relationship as a Notre Dame fan with that Stanford rivalry. One is the academics line up. Obviously, Notre Dame and Stanford, very high academic programs. That is something that both institutions still maintain a hold in value. So I get that. Nobody could argue the football's on equal footing and the fandom, like a handful of years ago, Stanford, Notre Dame had a good rivalry going, and then Stanford's kind of dropped off now. I don't know what's up with Shaw out there, but he isn't doing what he was a handful of years ago. And the other reason Notre Dame always wanted to keep that Stanford situation is it gives you another reason other than USC to make it out west for a recruiting footprint that you could be out there. If you got USC at home for Notre Dame, then you could go out to California, away at Stanford, still hit a recruiting trip, have a presence out west. But at the end of the day, if Notre Dame had to give up Stanford, but they get to keep USC in this move, that's a no-brainer. Sorry, Stanford. Like that isn't gonna, I don't think that's gonna upset that many Notre Dame fans. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know anybody who's like obsessed with that rivalry. I get why they want to play it, but if you end up in the Big Ten and you have limited extra games, maybe that's one you keep. Maybe it's not, but it isn't going to move the needle for me one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, that was another question I had for you was, if Notre Dame joins and there's a few other teams, like who's to say the Big Ten doesn't go to a 10-game schedule, and then you only have 2.
Yeah, but what you got to realize is you would only have, if they do that, which makes perfect sense. Say it's 10 and then each team only has 2 out of conference games. The biggest point of all that is USC wouldn't count against that. So that's your number one priority, is maintaining the USC game. If they're in conference, you don't have to worry about it. So then it does kind of free you up. Navy's the other one. Navy's a historic rivalry. How they helped us with the war, keep Notre Dame open. We promise we'll play them every year in perpetuity. Half the fan base loves the history of it. The other half of the fan base hates that game because of the way they play. There's more injuries. It's a no-win situation. You lose to them, your life's over. You beat them, big deal. You beat Navy. That's just kind of how the perception is. They would have a choice to make there. But USC's the one, man. Like, if I know I have USC in my pocket, I almost am going to say, I don't care what you do with those other 2 games. Yeah. USC is the one. That's the one that it had to beat. And if they're in conference, it frees you up a lot. You could do a lot then, schedule-wise.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't know if they would, keep divisions or if they give 2 or 3, permanent games that those are each year you're going to play those teams and rotate all the others, or what it's going to look like. But it would be interesting.
I don't know that either. Do you do pods? Do you have like geographical pods where there's 4 or 5 teams in these regions and then you play all of them every year and then a rotation with whatever's left? Like, all that formatting is just wait and see. Nobody knows.
Yeah. One thought I had with, you were talking with your first caller with the ACC and the grant of rights and all that stuff. And I'm just curious, if I don't think I know this wouldn't happen, but, the Big Ten and SEC and Notre Dame, and they just say, hey, let's get this list together. Let's have this little draft of like the 3 or 4 teams we want from the ACC. And let's, because that would free up, if enough teams leave the ACC and it has to dissolve, that would save a lot of schools a lot of money. Obviously I'm not a lawyer. I don't know all the legalese of all that stuff, but to me, it would just make a lot of sense if this is inevitably going to happen. That they're going to poach the ACC for the Clemsons, the Miami, Florida State, North Carolina. Why not get together with the SEC and do it now so that you're getting them out of the grant of rights and saving all those schools a lot of money.
Yeah, and a lot of that, just some of those deals and how do you got to get out of them and the promises made and all this other stuff. Like, I don't understand how all that works. And the grant of rights, well, what good is it if you could just break it with money? Like, you're kind of obligated, but if you're willing to pay the money, then you're not, And this little kind of agreement that I was reading about today between the Pac-12 and the ACC, like that little kind of alliance deal, that doesn't sound too official to me. That sounds like we're casually dating to me, is what that comes off like.
And while you've been on, there was an article that came out that there's talks of using the ACC network, and the Pac-12 would use that to show their games on the West Coast. So it just doesn't sound like feasible, or they're just grabbing at straws. It kind of sounds like right now.
I think those conferences are in temporary survival mode, looking for a way to be able to build a coalition to be able to get. I'm looking at this as a coalition to get through now until they figure out the next phase for anybody outside of what looks like it's going to be the Big Two, the Big Ten and the SEC. I would be nervous if I'm a fan of a team in not the Big Ten and not the SEC, and I'm not like Clemson, Florida State, Miami, like a brand. Yeah. I'm nervous. I would be very, very nervous.
For sure.
If you're one of those middle tier teams and it's almost like you don't matter and I don't know where you're going to end up, like that would make me very, very uncomfortable if I'm not the top teams that are going to get approached to make a move. That makes me nervous.
Yeah.
Like
what's
what
going to happen to them?
That's my next question. What do you do then? Like do you create a playoff where you have the Big Two, you have whatever's left of the other three, and then the winner of that gets an at-large bid? Or do they relegate something to a lower level, like a separate system?
Yeah.
Like, I've read all of these as possibilities, and I have no idea. But I know it's going to come down to money. That's what I do know.
Yeah. Well, I could see, the SEC and Big Ten saying, okay, whatever exists, say they all join into the Big 12, kind of like some rumors have been going on that, the leftovers are going to be the Big 12, and you just say, okay, your champion can be in our little playoff, but the other 7 seeds are going to be either Big 10 or SEC, or, we'll throw you that little bone, but the chances of you being involved in this playoff are, you got to win whatever league is left over. So,
yeah, that is like one of the hardest things for me when I'm asked questions about what I think about all this. It's hard for me to answer it because I don't have all the information. Oh, John, do you want us to be independent? Well, yes, but I also need to know we're going to have a fair path to the playoff if we are. And if we're not, then I have to reevaluate my answer. Everything's dependent on the arrangement. So I couldn't blame Notre Dame if they stand pat for a year or two, wait for some more structure, continuity, know what the playoff's going to look like and the access, how many teams, what you need to do. Do you have to be in the big conferences to be in it or not? It's hard for me to answer all this when I don't know those answers.
Yeah. Well, I think, like you said, Notre Dame is in a really, really strong position compared to some of these other teams, that Notre Dame at least has this leverage where, some of these other teams don't. Like, anybody would take Notre Dame. They'd be stupid not to. But these other teams are, they need to, I think some of these programs are going to need to be proactive rather than reactive. Because the ACC, part of the reason the ACC is screwed right now is because they were reactive to the last bout of realignment, and they said, oh, we're going to sign this huge deal that goes to 2036. We're all going to be safe. Well, now they're way behind the SEC and the Big Ten, but they're stuck. They can't renegotiate their deal,
Yep.
and so they were reactive. And even last year they were reactive, with that alliance with the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, and it seems like and even talking about the new playoffs, the deal was scrapped. They had this idea for the 12-team playoff, and the ACC was the one that was standing in the way again. And now I'm sure.
Yep. Now look where they're at.
That they. Yeah.
Yep. And but like
they've been reactive.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And they were one of the main ones that weren't comfortable moving forward with that. And now they're sitting there. I'm telling you, if I had to put money on anything that I believe will happen here, Notre Dame or otherwise, if I'm the SEC, I'm targeting Miami, Florida State, and Clemson, and even maybe Virginia Tech or North Carolina for basketball or whatever, and football. I'm targeting the biggest names in the ACC. Geographically, it matches up. Not that matters anymore, apparently, but geographically, it makes sense. I'm telling the biggest historical brands in the ACC come to the SEC, and then let whatever other middle and lower tier teams in the ACC figure it out. Not going to be their problem. But the SEC's cutthroat. I see that happening. Do you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That'd be my next move if I'm them.
Yeah, and that's what worries me as a Big Ten, person is that, Kevin Warren's had a bad reputation other than, now this USC thing, but I'm not sure that was even him, because apparently USC came to him, and why would you not say no to that? But that's what worries me is, some of those big programs in the ACC is the SEC is going to be more aggressive than the Big Ten in that. And then the Big Ten will get, if they want to match 20 or whatever the SEC ends up at, they're going to be, they're not going to get the top pick. Whereas if they were a little more aggressive, the Big Ten has this whole AAU thing. Obviously Notre Dame's not AAU, but I don't think that matters because Notre Dame has a strong academic prowess. So that's not a huge issue. But to me, I'm like, yeah, go. If you're the Big Ten, why not go for the big guys, even if they're not, Clemson, Florida State, they're not AAU, but why not try to go for them, get down into the South, into SEC territory? You're already in the West now, why not try to truly go be a national brand? I think that would be even more enticing to Notre Dame too, to have, access to Florida, or if you went for a Georgia Tech, you're in Atlanta. Georgia's a huge, talent pipeline.
Yep.
That's what would worry me about the Big Ten, is not being even more aggressive if we truly are going to 20 or even 24 per, these two super conferences.
Yep, that's a good point. Now, what's interesting, and somebody brought this up today, and I think it's actually a pretty interesting strategic point that the SEC could do. Picture this dynamic we're in right now, and then they sit at this table and decide playoff access and who can be in and what you got to do. People are now saying the SEC may want no required conference automatic bids. You have to be in a conference to be in it to do that. And they may not want that and want all our at-large bids, because they fear that if they make it a requirement, then Notre Dame's going to jump in the Big Ten, and that weakens the SEC, because then the Big Ten would have that Notre Dame brand. And they may strategically think they're in a better position to entice Notre Dame to stay independent rather than force something, but then they join their competition. I thought that was an interesting strategic angle.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense if you're the SEC, because Notre Dame's not obviously the SEC would say yes, come Notre Dame, but it's not a great fit.
Right.
And they know that the Big Ten would be the best fit. So yeah, I think that's a power play by the SEC for sure, to not totally settle on the playoff structure, so that it is more enticing for Notre Dame.
And the other thing is, and the way the SEC is, they always figure they're going to have at least 1 or 2 or 3 teams up in the top anyway. So that's another reason they might want at large, because they don't want to have the top 2 teams, but the second one doesn't get in because of these auto bids. So there's a lot of different chess that can be played here. And a lot of strategery.
I don't think that the G5, I don't think we're going to see, obviously Cincinnati's moving up to Big 12, but I don't see them being included, whatever the playoff becomes next. Just with all this movement, who knows?
But you know what? Now,
the future at all.
Now, let me ask you this. You bring up something I've been meaning to mention. Thank you, by the way. So picture this. You get this big, say it's a 20-team SEC. You got a 20-team Big 10, and you have whatever's left of maybe one conference or a blended whatever. How do you award that extra group a playoff spot? Like if they're the top of it, but the competition, there is no good teams because all the good ones jumped into these big conferences. Like that's another thing to consider. Like if you get to a point where all of the really top level competitive teams are poached into these mega conferences, what do you do with that other level without, like, it's just, there's so much moving parts here. I don't have the answer to.
Yeah, well, I think we saw a picture of it with Cincinnati. Like, I don't think anybody thought Cincinnati had a chance, and it was clear that they didn't. They didn't play a hard. I mean, they played Notre Dame and won that game, but they didn't have a tough schedule, and the gap is only going to get larger too between the SEC and Big Ten and everybody else with the revenue payout. I mean,
yep.
And NIL and Iowa, football team came out with their own, I forget what it's called, but people pay into it and then it pays the players and
like the collective thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Hey, congratulations on the offensive line recruit, Proctor.
Yeah, I mean, in state, I would be pretty pissed if we didn't get him.
Hey, Notre Dame people are mad because that is the type of player that normally is like Notre Dame's bread and butter. Like that's the guy. But whenever it got brought up in Notre Dame circles, every time I heard his name on a recruiting podcast, they would go, Iowa guy, not going to leave home. Notre Dame ain't going to waste their time. So I actually respect the hell out of it. I respect that.
Yeah.
And you know what else too?
Yeah.
He brought up how much money. Did you see those where he was saying how much money he was getting offered for NIL deals to leave the state?
Yeah.
And he still held firm and said, I'm not, that's not what this is about. I think the world would be a better place with a little bit of more of that in it. I really respect the hell out of it.
Oh, for sure.
I really do.
But I think some of that too, I think Iowa's pitch is, hey, offensive linemen, how many first rounders have we had in the last 15 years?
Really good lineage. Lineage.
Yeah, you might not make money on the front end, but you're going to make a lot of money in the league. So we can help you make sure that happens. So.
Yeah, but I just thought that was kind of a rarity for a guy of that talent, thought that much up for him to have that perspective, and it was actually pretty damn refreshing. So congratulations to him and to you for landing. I should say not landing, but keeping a talent like that, because he's going to be a really good one.
Yeah, that was huge.
So
sure.
let me ask this: where do you think this is going to end up for Notre Dame, and when? That's kind of where this all comes to head. What do you see? How do you see this playing out down the line, and what's your time frame?
I mean, I would agree with what you've already kind of said, that this is kind of inevitable now. Whether Notre Dame waits a year or two to see what the playoff format is.
Do you mean competitively? Do you mean financially, or just the whole bowl of wax and how it's all trending? Just all of it?
I think the whole everything, but I also think, like you said, there's, why wouldn't you take an $80 million pay raise? I know, Notre Dame's independence is huge for them. I have family that are lifelong Notre Dame fans. Like, I get it. But
with the new look Big Ten, you're not giving up as much as you used to by making this move.
Yeah.
You still got your
Yeah.
coast to coast. You got Chicago, you got New York, you got LA. Okay, national schedule. Keep your rivals. Same access to the playoff. $80 million raise. I'm just telling you, that's a tough deal to turn down. As much as I love independence, if they did this, I would totally understand why. It's a good deal for them.
Well, and I think there's a case where you could keep your NBC partnership too, to a degree, where it's like, hey, NBC, you can have all of the Notre Dame home games, and when Notre Dame's away, we'll give you a third or fourth tier Big Ten game for that week.
Right.
To kind of include NBC in that, because I think NBC is probably going to be a player in the media rights deal too.
I remember reading stuff about talks of the Big Ten having some sort of strategic partnership with NBC to do like double headers on NBC with like a Notre Dame home game and then another Big Ten game stacked right behind it. Maybe that is something that's in play in these negotiations as well, where everybody can kind of get a piece and stay involved. I'm open to that too.
Yeah. Well, there, a lot of what I've heard is there's a lot more money if it's what the NFL does. They divide up their package. They have Fox and CBS during the day, then they have NBC for Sunday night, and they have ESPN for Monday night. And I think that's what you're going to see Big Ten trying to do is, maybe there is a Friday night Amazon streaming game, or Apple. Apple, as soon as USC and UCLA were in, Apple was like, we're back in. They had bowed out, but now they're back into the negotiations. So that'll be an interesting piece. Yeah,
for sure. There's just a lot of moving parts and a lot of questions. It's changing fast. I don't know how it's going to end up, but I know it's going to be big news no matter what happens, whenever it happens.
For sure.
Well, thank you so much for calling. Really, really good call. Feel free to give me a call anytime, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, enjoyed the show. Thank you.
And I'm going to give you one compliment here that I don't usually give. I don't usually give out compliments for fans of other teams. I honestly have nothing against Iowa, and I pretty much hate everybody. So I think that's a good compliment for me. Like, I could come up with a reason to hate a lot of these teams. I don't have anything against Iowa, and I really like the hospital tradition, by the way, as well.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's a cool tradition.
Yep.
And, they even added the kid captain each week. Now it's going to pick the song during the wave, which is just another added, pretty cool thing.
Yeah,
so.
I think that's classy as can be, and that's kind of spirit that I wish more people had in this country. So beautiful call. Thank you. Call again, my friend. I like getting people with outside perspectives. Call anytime.
All right. Thanks, man.
Take care. Have a good night. I got a question. That's a good call, by the way. I'm going to go back to the chat here. How viable do you think it is that Notre Dame could try and scratch and cobble together a third super conference, kind of as an alternative to continued independence? I just think it'd be hard. I just think it'd be hard to be able to pull together everything you need from scratch. And what's the quality going to be? Like, if you did that, who are you going to pull? Who are you going to get? Are you going to try and buy out teams that are in other conferences? Or are we limited to the ones that aren't in the SEC and the Big Ten? Like, I just think you may not have to do all that work from scratch if a structure that's pretty favorable already exists right in front of you. And a lot of that legwork is already down the road. I've seen this proposed before. It's not impossible, but it's a big task to start it from scratch. And I just question the quality of who you're going to be able to pull in it, is my question. And do you have enough teams to make a relative schedule, rotation, all that? So I get the notion behind it. I just think it might be hard to create. I question who you're going to pull teams from and have them be of highest quality enough and enough of them. And then you have the whole discussion of TV and money rights. Like, I just think there's a lot of work there compared to the Big Ten, where a lot of this is structured and in a good spot and looks pretty favorable. So I don't know. What else do we have here? The Big Ten changes its name to the Big ND Conference. I don't think they're going to go for that. Would we go to CBS? Man, I am old enough to remember Notre Dame playing on CBS and that introduction music and all that when I was a little kid. Like, I'm old enough to remember that stuff, man. Go back to the phone lines, 937. 937, who we got? Hello.
What's up, man?
What's up? Who we talking to?
My name's AJ, man. I've loved you for about after the first Clemson game. That's when I found you, and I've never met someone that shared my same hatred for Brian Kelly.
Hey, he just didn't want to work hard in recruiting and just danced around a lot. What's not to like?
Well, a couple of things. So the first thing about the first game of next year, and the caller that said that no one's going to show up to it, I think she might be missing the really big picture about Notre Dame and the historical black colleges.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And that is going to be a uniquely big deal just because of the historical significance, the way it's all set up. And you know what? You bring up a really good point. The other thing is, it's a big deal to a lot of people in this country that Marcus Freeman, as an African-American, is in this position in Notre Dame now, this high profile. Like, that's a big deal to a lot of people. And it's something I don't feel like gets talked about a lot. But that game's going to have a very unique feel for the reason I think that you mentioned. You're right about that.
So here, and a big thing I feel also being a black American, it feels like sometimes we're kind of looked at weirdly because we like Notre Dame, if that makes any sense. So I think the fact that you get a fresh set of eyes at such a historical place that a lot of people love might be a bigger deal for like the next generation coming up. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
No, that also segues into my next question that might make a lot of ND fans upset. So I've noticed something about a lot of the fans, and do you think they might not like Marcus Freeman for different kinds of reasons, if you know what I'm trying to say without saying it?
I mean, everybody in my circle is so excited about what he's doing in recruiting that I haven't really personally seen that in my circle, because the recruiting has been so good that everybody's excited. I will tell you, if he for some reason had a horrible year and people turned on him, you're always going to have a certain percentage of people that are going to take it there because that's just what they do. But right now, everybody seems to love him because the recruiting's great, and he's able to relate to a lot of these guys because he's younger, hip, modern in a way Kelly wasn't. We're seeing recruiting results. So right now, most people are on board with Freeman. I haven't seen he's recruiting so good. It's really hard to not like the guy yet, you know?
Oh, completely. Like 110%. I was all on the same board as the Freeman factor when he first got there, because I felt like he should be the next head coach just because of how amazing that he is, not just as a coach, but as a man. But I've just noticed the fact that, like you were saying something earlier, like, oh, he's going to be 0-2. He's in over his head, yah, and it just feels like kind of like a Tyrone Willingham kind of feel, you know, like I feel that people are not going to give him a good leash. And the first time things go the wrong way, they're going to start pointing to certain fingers.
Yep.
Like that's how it feels for me.
Yeah, I do understand that concern. And I hope it doesn't turn like that. And it's like you can't, but here's the issue with that. I talk to people all the time who are like, Man, one of the best things about Notre Dame hiring Marcus Freeman is that he's a young, energetic, good-looking, modern, hip black guy that can relate to all these players that are also that, and that's helping us in recruiting. How can you like that? And then if he loses a few games, then hold it against him. Like, you can't have both, right?
Right, correct.
Like, those are competing
also,
philosophies.
it's just the fact that you can't make everyone happy because, again, I feel we will win in Columbus week 1 just because, yeah, they have really good, perimeter and they have really good wide receivers, but they still have a terrible offensive line. They have a terrible defensive line, and these games are going to be won in the trenches. The same way how Ohio State lost versus Michigan because their offensive line wouldn't stand up against the defensive edge or defensive ends from Michigan. I feel that our defense could be better than Michigan's last year.
Yep.
So and again, I work in Dayton. I'm behind enemy lines by Columbus. I'm like the lone Notre Dame guy down here. And I'm just honest. I'm calling the W. It's not going to be by a lot, but it might be by 3.
When you're looking at that game and the breakdown, I've heard other people say the same thing you have. That Michigan defensive strategy is the way to win that game. It's like, oh, look at the quarterback and look at all those receivers. If you're getting that kind of pressure and he doesn't have time and he's not comfortable, that's how Notre Dame stays close in that game defensively. Offensively, I think Notre Dame needs to find a way to keep the ball and run some time off the clock, eat up some time and score to minimize the time Ohio State has the ball, and then pressure is Notre Dame's best option.
Right. And people tend to forget that we have Al Golden as a defensive coordinator.
Hey.
I mean, this guy literally just coached in the Super Bowl last year. I think he might be able to hopefully defend Ohio State's offense. But I think people love to give Notre Dame crap just because we're Notre Dame. And so be it. We have to be better than them, and that's just how we got to do it.
Are you trash talking back and forth with the Ohio State people locally, or are you laying low, seeing what happens? How's it going to go for you if it goes bad there? How's it going to go for you in your life living in Ohio?
Oh, I live and die with every play of Notre Dame. So, every time we were to lose, when I walk into work, I have to hold a press conference of what happened to Notre Dame. It's the funniest thing. But the moment that Ohio State loses, we didn't have our best players, or we were just destined. No, you guys got blown out. I keep bringing up the times they lost to Iowa on the road. They lost to Purdue on the road. They got blown out by some other team at home. It's you guys are human. That's the thing. You guys are Ohio State fans think that they're just untouchable. And it's well, it's easy when you said Michigan plays maybe 2 games a year. You can kind of slip Ohio State into that too. The Big Ten's not that strong.
Yeah.
Keep it honest.
Yeah.
We all can't play Maryland and Rutgers every week.
Yeah. It's and that is a reality. You're going to be top heavy. And it's interesting to think about where that would all shift if Notre Dame was in that conference, the power dynamic and the shift and where it all is. So I don't know. I'm not going to, here's what I'm saying. If we don't beat Ohio State, I'm not overreacting on it being a big indictment that Freeman's never going to figure out how to be a head coach. This game's getting built up so much that I feel like it's going to be an overreaction one way or the other, no matter what. That's what I'm feeling.
But it's kind of like the fact that it's good to have a reaction now. You know what I mean? Because Brian Kelly felt everything was a business trip. No, this is not a business trip. This is to be the man, you have to beat the man. And this guy off the bat's trying to beat the man. You see what I'm saying? He's over here getting these great recruits. So instead of, waiting for the end of the year, we'll play USC at the end. No. Give us Ohio State week 1, see what happens. I mean, again, I'd rather have the opportunity to lose than go 12-0 and not play anyone. So beat the man.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's how Clemson got there.
Yeah.
Clemson kept knocking on doors until they got in. We're no different. We've had 5 10-win seasons. It's time to go.
Yeah, and if
I mean, I think we're on the edge.
I think
Go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
I think it's interesting you bring up Clemson because in a lot of people's opinion, if Notre Dame is going to be able to make it to the top and win playoff games, the Clemson roadmap is one that a lot of people think would be the one. Gradually rise up your recruiting, get to a certain point, and then break through. And I see some of those similarities too. The recruiting classes, like some of the older ones, kind of mirrored it, and then they get better. But then now it's going to be a different level with Freeman. The recruiting now is going to be off. I mean, it's unmeasurable right now. We've never seen anything like it the last 11 years for sure with Kelly.
Well, the thing with recruiting, I think we're recruiting a better caliber of kid, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense.
Because I watch every piece of Notre Dame content except for one, because I think they're really anti-Notre Dame, even though they say that they're a Notre Dame like information people, but I don't see it that way. But these kids, when they talk about why, I mean, they talk family, they talk about their future, they talk all this. They don't talk about money. So it's the fact that we're getting quality players, but great men, being coached by better men. So I think it's the fact that when it comes to team maturity, yeah, you can have a bunch of 5-stars, but if they can't play as a team, and if they're not mature enough for that moment, what's the point of having them?
Yep.
Kind of like when Ohio State played Clemson and finally beat them. Clemson wasn't ready yet, like emotionally. Like all those 5-stars got you nowhere when all the chips were down.
Yep.
So I feel like we're trying to get better quality and better caliber people. Like it's just so that way the moment won't be too big.
Yep, I think that's very well stated. But I'm going to hold you to this. You're going to have to call after the Ohio State game, and we're going to revisit this and see how your prediction held out. Either way, how it goes. Give me a call back.
I'll make you a deal. I'll call in if you give me the deepest. Right.
You did that pretty good.
Now, let me explain though.
You did that pretty good
because my wife hates it, and my 5-year-old does it all the time.
Listen, I didn't just. That was not something. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I'm telling you, we listen to it as a family, but my wife, hates it from her soul.
Listen. Tell your wife. That was never something.
She can hear you.
Listen, that was never something I planned. It was never something I created and sat there and came up with a bit. Like it just happened one day, and then a bunch of people thought it was interesting, and then it's just how I do it now. But I swear that was never planned. There wasn't a bit. There wasn't a gambit. I didn't come up with it. It just came out of my mouth one day when I started a show, and then people thought it was funny. Half the people love it. Half the people hate it, but it's different. And so now it's just what I do.
Oh, I love it. I look forward to it all the time. And every time you put any content out, I put my phone on full blast and hold it next to my wife's ear so she has to feel it. Like it's something to look forward to. I'm not gonna lie to you. I love it down here in Wilmington.
I love you, and I feel really bad for her. Okay.
Oh yeah. That's not the first time she's heard that. Trust me.
Oh,
it's not easy being married to me. Bless her heart. I think it was the great Lou Holtz that said, we pray for my wife, but when she dies, we'll pray to her. She'll be canonized.
There you go. Well, I appreciate your support. Give me a call back. We'll do a bunch of call-in shows before Ohio State, but make sure you call me back after it. All right?
Absolutely. Be safe and be cool.
Beautiful. Take care. Good night. Man, I feel bad for his wife listening to me. Mike Norris, Notre Dame fans are mad that Brian Kelly thinks LSU is a better job than the Domers. No one that I know thinks that. No one that I know thinks that. Most people that I know were absolutely thrilled to death when Brian Kelly left. He's not that nice of a personality. and he refused to put in the work it takes to win at Notre Dame. He refused to put in the work it takes to recruit at Notre Dame. Notre Dame got way closer to a championship the second Kelly went to LSU and they hired Freeman than they ever were with Kelly. So this whole LSU thing, it's like when I rip Brian Kelly on Twitter, I get all these LSU people saying, you're just jealous we took your man. You're an idiot. Research my entire Twitter and YouTube history. It is full of me saying, Kelly isn't getting it done here. I'm ready for something else. You will never find any content from me on Twitter or YouTube of me saying, you know, this Kelly guy's awesome. Never. Absolutely not. Notre Dame got closer to a championship when Kelly left. He refused to recruit the way you need to win in Notre Dame. Won a lot of games, did a lot of good things. Didn't get over the hump because of that reason. In no way, shape, or form am I jealous of Brian Kelly went to LSU. I think it's hilarious. I think it's a weird culture fit. And I am just glad that everything he does now is none of my concern or my problem, other than to look for content I can make fun of and create off of. Okay? But Notre Dame fans are mad that Brian Kelly thinks LSU's a better job. It's a better job for Brian Kelly because he can recruit not as hard and do it locally. So that's better for Brian Kelly because he don't want to have to recruit nationally. He can do it all locally, whatever. Good for him. But jealous that he wanted to leave? No, I thank God every day he's gone. Every single day, I thank God Brian Kelly's gone. And my blood pressure goes down every minute Marcus Freeman's in charge of this program and not Kelly. Because I know, unlike Kelly, this guy's recruiting his ass off and working every single day, doing everything he can. Oh, and by the way, requiring that of everybody else on the staff too. Kelly didn't do that. Kelly didn't do that. What do you mean, John? Prove it. We have like 3 wide receivers right now in the whole program. All right? It's a Brian Kelly issue. So, Mike, everything you're saying here, I just disagree with, but I'm glad you're here. I love it. Oh, boy. Pigskin Pete, I really appreciate you. I don't know if you're still in here or not, man, but Pigskin Pete's a legit dude. He does the Clemson program. And I'm going to tell you guys this, the other thing about Pigskin Pete, you know, I know some people, he ruffles feathers with some of his opinions, and ACC Clemson guy. When I was first starting to take off on this channel and grow a little bit, he was one of the guys further down the path that I could go to with questions or how to format something or how to do this, how to approach that technical stuff. He's been a guy willing to help and be nice to me from the beginning. So Pigskin Pete is the man. Everybody should go over and subscribe to him if you haven't yet. Oh, who we got? 614. 614, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi.
How you doing?
This is Rob. Pretty good.
What do you make of all this? Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say one thing before we get started about what the previous caller said. Or he asked if the Notre Dame fans would be disturbed about having a black coach. I just wanted to say, if you're a real Catholic, you're a real Christian, and real Christians aren't racist. So I just wanted to make that comment. I'm a real Catholic. And I just want to tell everybody, when you get to heaven, there's no Keller in heaven. So just what he said about our Notre Dame fans, you know, how do they react having a black coach? If you're a real Catholic, which most Notre Dame fans are, that's not an issue.
Yep, good point.
Get that out of the way.
Very good point.
Well, what I wanted to tell you real quick is the statement you made earlier. You said the SEC is hostile. Well, you can add the ESPN and soon to be Fox along with the Big Ten, because I guarantee they're going to leave Notre Dame with 2 choices. they're going to either have to join the ACC and try to help them survive, or they're going to have to join the Big Ten, because I'm telling you, those two conferences, the SEC and the Big Ten down the road, that don't think that they're going to let Notre Dame or some other school that didn't want to play ball with them try to get into the college football playoff. So to me, Notre Dame has those two choices. Do they go and try to save the ACC and join them, or do they take, obviously the more money, it's in their own backyard, like you said, and join the Big Ten? I think that's the two choices Notre Dame has, frankly, down the road. What do you think?
I totally think those are available to them. And I just see the Big Ten as being so much more stable long-term than the ACC. I think the ACC is on rocky footing, and that's why they probably want Notre Dame to help stabilize. But I still have a fear the SEC is going to try and yank the top historical brands from the ACC at some point. And they have a very weak, bad TV deal that affects them. And it's going to be hard to work through that. And so for those reasons, I think joining the ACC is out. I think that's a very unlikely scenario as we sit.
Yeah, because the trouble there is, if you're Notre Dame and you join the ACC, what if the SEC is able to pull just one team, say a Clemson out? Then that right there is going to change the whole game. As far as Notre Dame's concerned, the Big 12, that's completely out. That ain't going to last.
Yeah.
So the thing for Notre Dame, they're on between a rock and a hard place. If they join the ACC and the SEC starts pulling one or two top teams, that weakens Notre Dame's position in the playoffs.
Yep, for sure.
Because I'm telling you those conferences, like now that the USC is with the Big Ten, when this thing gets a full-scale war to get into the playoffs, don't think that they're just going to let Notre Dame play USC every year. Same as the SEC, don't think that they're going to let Notre Dame just, because if they do that, Notre Dame wins, they're weakening their mantra that they've been like you just had Alabama and Georgia. Well, you just watch as these conferences grow, the SEC grows, then they're going to be pushing 3 and 4 teams, because we don't know where the college football play. Are they going to go to 8? But I don't care where they go. The Big Ten and the SEC, the more teams they get, the more they're going to push to have more teams in.
Yeah.
And they sure aren't going to try to help anybody that spawns them. They're sure not going to help if the Clemson doesn't play ball with them or anyone else. They're sure not going to try to help them play Alabama or a big team get a victory, and that gives them a foot up on getting into the playoffs.
Yeah, and this it's hard though, because you also don't know, it's very hard to answer some of these questions when I don't know all of the details that go into me answering them. What is that playoff format going to look like? What do you have to do to qualify to be in it? How many teams is it? Is it guaranteed bids or at large? A lot of those questions we just don't know the answers to. And that's why I said, if Swarbrick needs to call time out on this discussion for a year or two and wait for other things to shift and settle, and then when you go back to investigate this, you maybe have a little bit less negotiative leverage, but what you do gain is clarity. You are knowing exactly what your options are. You're knowing exactly what the dynamics are. You'll be one of the final pieces of the puzzle. And I wouldn't be against them reevaluating it and doing it that way.
Right.
But hey,
and it's just a really tough choice, because to me, Notre Dame down the road is really the best option is the Big Ten. But again,
for
I
sure,
don't know, what they're thinking.
No, it has to be the Big Ten is salivating over this, and no one's going to convince me a part of USC joining wasn't all some big attempt at romancing Notre Dame and enticing them. And I admit, even for me, Mr. Independent, lifelong Notre Dame guy, even I admit that has made me a lot more open to this if it's what we need to do to be financially viable and make the playoff with reasonable entry standards. That USC thing's a big deal, man.
You got to have, you got to have the games too. That's what I said, down the road. they're going to try to set up the games in such a way that they have the power edge to try to get all their teams, and they went from their conference. So what I'm worried about down the road, Notre Dame, they're going to slowly get shut out of more and more viable games that can get them into the playoffs, and they're going to be playing weaker teams. And that they're going to put the squeeze on Notre Dame and everyone, and Clemson, Notre Dame, anyone else that's big, Oregon, they are going to put the squeeze on them. Like right now, the ACC, you hear the talk that they're trying to get Notre Dame and West Virginia. So everybody's going to be squeezing because they know if they don't, really Notre Dame, I see is the only way to save the ACC. Because if not, like you said, the SEC is going to pick off Clemson, maybe Miami or Florida State. They're going to go after those teams.
Yeah, it's a big game of musical chairs where you don't even know where all the chairs are. Like it's really, I don't know if it's in the best spirit of college football, but let's call this what it is. It's figuring out how to get the most money for you and your people.
Right.
And that's what this all is. I just think Notre Dame's in a position where whether it's now, whether it's next year, or right before something changes and the new routine picks up, Notre Dame can make a move. They might lose a little leverage, but they'll know exactly what they're jumping into. What the playoff format's going to be like and what you got to do to be in it is a big, big question that I need answered to fully give an appropriate answer of if I'm up for this or not.
Right. Well, I just wanted to let you know that what you said is only partly. You're going to have a lot of hostility. And not only people are thinking about, well, TV market money, it's going to be more than that because ultimately if the playoffs expand, there's going to be more money into it. And you're going to have, like I said, the two biggies, the two big conferences are going to try to shut out the other conferences. I mean, you're going to just think if they would take a Clemson, the SEC, they're going to try to have Alabama maybe undefeated. They might end up undefeated, say to A&M, and then right behind them, you might have a one-loss Georgia team and a Clemson team. And you know for sure that the SEC is going to try to push 4 teams.
Yep.
Like the Big Ten will.
Yep. And so that's
so
why. Yeah, you're right. And that's why I think they're going to go with at large. They would push for at larges and not guaranteed because they're thinking they're going to have the top 3, 4, 5 teams. And so you want to make sure you can get them all in.
Right.
It's wild out here.
Yep. And to get there, you got to have those marquee games. And hopefully, Notre Dame's got to think about that. You've got to have those marquee games to get in. So they got to be careful they don't get themselves positioned out.
Yeah, and that is the big risk. And another question I don't have the answer to, and none of us do. That's another big risk. If you try and hold back, not do this at all in a year now or whatever, and schedule independently, they can box you out in those major conferences to where they make it impractical for you to be able to schedule enough good teams to be considered for the playoff. And then at that point, what good is your independence doing you? None at all.
Correct. That's correct. That's absolutely right. That's the big thing I think Notre Dame has to think about. Don't worry about as much as TV markets and all that because the end game is to get as many teams as you can into the college football playoffs because there's going to be a heck of a lot of money there, especially if they expand, say, to 8 slots. You can get 4 or 5 teams in. That's a lot of money.
It wouldn't surprise me.
People aren't thinking about either.
It wouldn't surprise me if they went 12. Think about how much more that opens up if you went to 12 even. Like, I don't know if that's too many for people's appetite, but I also don't know who all's included in the field. Like, I don't even know that.
Right.
It's wild. There's a lot of things changing.
Yeah, I think only 8. I don't know about 12 because then you're adding more playing time, more weeks of, and the players after the schedules are going to get more brutal. And after a 12-game schedule, a brutal schedule with top teams in those big conferences, and then you got to play, maybe an extra 2 weeks before to get to the final. That's going to be hard on the players.
Yeah.
So I think the players, they're going to have to think about the players, and they're going to have a say too.
Yep.
I think 8 might be the magic number they're going to look at.
Yep. And that gives you some flexibility on the back end for at-larges. And maybe there's a blend of like certain things give you automatic and then a few at-large bids. I don't know. But there's just a lot of questions none of us have answers to. And here's the other part about it. Not only do I not have the answers to these questions, I don't even know who gets to answer these questions. Like, I honestly don't know. Think about it. The college football playoff system is not even owned and managed and operated by the NCAA. It is a separate private entity. So not only do I not have answers to these questions, I don't even know who does. And that's a little uncomfortable for me too, because I don't know who gets to make those decisions as this whole dynamic sits today. And that makes me a little uncomfortable. I just don't know who's doing it.
And think about another question you got to think about. Think about the NIL money. If you've got top tier markets and teams in this conference, they're going to have a lot bigger pot of NIL money than teams are caught outside. And I think that's another thing Notre Dame has to think about, because NIL is changing the game. And if you're not in a market or a conference because those conferences, I'm telling you right now, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be fluttering in NIL cash. And they have a one-up to bring in recruit talent on all the other teams. So now Notre Dame, I think, recruits a little better just, on the one basis. They can recruit a lot of Catholic players. I'm Catholic. I'd sure consider Notre Dame if I was a player, just for that reason. Now they have a one-up there. Right now, though, I don't know do you know how much NIL involvement does Notre Dame have? Are they trying to rev that up right now?
My understanding is that they are trying to get things a little more organized and structured with NIL. And I understand that they have a couple different things going on that they're working on. One of them with Brady Quinn and the Mendoza family, which are some big Notre Dame names, the Mendozas and Brady Quinn. They're putting together something. And then there's a couple other things. I just don't think Notre Dame's going to be as public about it as some of these other places, because they don't want people to think they're paying guys, just to go there. That's not how it's set up. There's stuff set up through community, charity stuff, things where you could give back and the guys benefit off it. It's going to take a different kind of recruit to be open and want to embrace the way Notre Dame's doing this. And so far, Freeman's had no problem finding those guys. Recruiting's been great.
Hopefully you see what A&M and how Alabama's coach called out A&M that he bought the whole team. I just think NIL is going to play a big part in the future. And I think if you're in one of the top leagues, the NIL money is going to be there, and they're sure going to use it like you see.
Yep. Yeah, that's for sure. But that Texas A&M thing, you know what I hope happens? They spent $30 million on all those guys. I hope they all have big egos, all can't get along, and they don't win anything with all that talent. That's what I want to see happen. All those alpha egos fighting over who got the better deal. I hope that it doesn't come together at all and they don't accomplish anything. That'd make me feel good.
That'd be hilarious.
That's what I want to see. So thanks for calling, my friend. I really appreciate it. Give me a call again anytime.
Okay, thanks. Nice talking to you.
You as well. Have a good evening. Take care. All right, last call of the night. We're going on 2.5 hours here. 708. 708, who we got?
You got Ray from Chicago.
What's up, Ray? Where are you at in Chicago? LaGrange? That's what's showing up on my ID.
Yeah, not too far. Yep, LaGrange is a good spot.
What's going on, my friend?
Okay, here's my biggest concern, and you haven't brought it up tonight. Now, let's just assume Notre Dame does join the Big Ten. Let me ask you a question. How do you like playing Friday night football? How do you like playing Thursday night football? How do you like the fact that Notre Dame will not have a set schedule until possibly 10 days until the time of the scheduled date? You know what I'm saying? Look at Purdue playing State this year on Thursday night. how many Notre Dame fans are going to be able to attend their own home games, given that Notre Dame has a small, alumni base? What I'm fearful is you're going to see 50-50, 60-40. When Ohio State comes to Notre Dame, there'll be at least as many Ohio State fans there for a big game in, say, November. There'll be Wisconsin fans. And I don't think Notre Dame is going to get the home field advantage all that frequently in the big games. Just my opinion. But I really don't think Notre Dame is. I think Swarbrick's going to look at this thing and say, somehow we have to be able to control the time we play. I don't think the Big Ten's going to allow that. But look at the Big Ten schedules right now, and nobody knows when they're playing. Except Notre Dame. Outside Notre Dame, there's nobody outside the first 3 games that they don't know when they're playing. And I don't know how Notre Dame fans are going to get to games given that they might have a 1-week notice. Oh, guess what? We're playing on Saturday night at 8 o'clock. It's going to be tough.
That is a good point. And one that you're correct. I haven't brought up or thought about. I have a feeling Notre Dame fans would probably not like the Thursday night game. Probably not like the Friday night game, but would like that more than the Thursday night because at least Friday leads into Saturday. But my bigger question is, are those concerns worth not accepting an extra $80 million a year in perpetuity?
No, I think Notre Dame. Here's the thing. I've gone to 200 Notre Dame football games at Notre Dame over my lifetime. I've been to 50. I've been to every Notre Dame USC game since 1973 that's been played in South Bend. So I know what it's like to go to a game. My only problem is I see such a dwindling fan base. Like I was at the Cincinnati game this past year. There were a lot of Cincinnati fans there. I just think that's a shrinking fan base, and I'm not sure that they can fill that 75,000-seat stadium up without Wisconsin fans coming, without Michigan, Iowa. Look at Northwestern. I'm not far from Northwestern. When Northwestern plays a decent Big Ten team like Iowa or Wisconsin, it's just overrun. And I'm not really trying to compare Notre Dame to Northwestern. They're not that comparable. But it's like the stadium has literally got more visiting fans than any of those type of games that even Minnesota will come down and will have more fans at a Northwestern game.
But I can't. Now, I lived on the corner of Central and Asbury, right across from Mustard's Last Stand at the stadium there in Northwestern. Those are my old stomping grounds. And I used to walk over for their 11 o'clock Big Ten game, watch it, and then go back to my condo, watch Notre Dame when they started at 2:30. So I had a good routine going for a bunch of years. I don't understand Northwestern. They don't care about football. So I can't, they large scale, they don't. But here's my thing. You're saying Notre Dame's fan base is like dwindling. I think it's more, the issue would be that Notre Dame's fan base isn't regional and local. Like, it's not like, Nebraska, and most people who like Nebraska live locally to Nebraska. I think the issue is that Notre Dame fans and alums are spread out all over. You can't just decide in the morning to drive to Notre Dame and go to a game. If you live in all these other states, you have to plan ahead to do it. And you're saying you don't know practically how that would be able to be done.
Well, I don't know how many people the Chicago base is the largest fan base for Notre Dame football. You know that. I know that.
Hop on the toll road and shoot right over.
Go over to Skyway.
Yep.
And that's my route to all those 200 games I've gone to over my lifetime. And there's lots of Notre Dame fans coming from Chicago. But I can do that. If you told me that there's a Notre Dame game tomorrow, I can be there. And quite frankly, I'd like the idea of being in the Big Ten for a long, long time, because I'm the kind of guy who likes to go to games. So I would drive to Madison. I can drive to Iowa. I can drive to Purdue. I've done that many, many times.
Hey, you can shoot down 57 and go to Illinois as well if they're in the Big Ten.
They've never played Illinois in my lifetime, but I guarantee you if they were playing in Champaign, say in 2025, there's a good chance I'll be at that game. But that's my point, that people from Iowa, Wisconsin are going to be coming they're coming to Notre Dame because they haven't been there in my entire life. And so it's personally, I want them to be in the Big Ten if it's a need that they have to do. But in some ways, it might sound crazy, but I wouldn't mind them seeing them in the SEC either, just because it's such a football conference. And playing Tennessee, playing Alabama and Georgia, there's something about that I'm intrigued about.
I can understand. Well, there's a dedication to the religion that is college football in that conference that I'll always have a soft spot for. It's just different, and it's just everything down there. I mean, do you have any concerns about how Notre Dame matches up with them academically, like all of that overlapping? That was a big reason they liked the ACC deal, was because of the overlap with a lot of the academia. And the Big Ten has a lot of that too. Geographically, Notre Dame's in the Big Ten footprint. I get that. But the SEC would take Notre Dame. They would take Notre Dame.
I get what you're saying, but if Los Angeles schools can start traveling to New York, then there's no reason why Notre Dame can't travel to Georgia and down to Texas and Oklahoma just as easily. Quite frankly, Notre Dame is always traveling anyway. They're in the ACC, so they're going to go 700 miles down to Tobacco Road. Well, you know what? Now you just reverse it. You say we're going down to Texas or Alabama or wherever. This is really a football. This whole athletic department stuff, 90% of it's obviously being driven by football. So if it's a football thing, I don't know why Notre Dame wouldn't want to be. Listen, I can debate this all day and all night, but I just wouldn't be opposed to definitely considering going to the SEC. But it's the TV, it's the scheduling thing that has me concerned, because Thursday night football, Friday night football, Saturday night football, never knowing when you're going to play basically until, like I say, how the TV schedule comes out sometimes on Monday afternoon, and you say, oh, that's when we're playing on Saturday night? Oh, well, how do you plan for that if you live in Boston to get to the game?
Right. Well, now let me ask you this. I understand your scheduling conflict. I do get that. Who that's going to matter to is my question. Like, you know what I mean? Like, is it just us, or is that something that the university has to consider? Do they just figure we're going to get all this money, people will figure it out, and whoever's there is there? Like, I wonder if that's a consideration to them, or just people that are thoughtful and thinking of it the way you do. So that's, I don't know. But let me ask this. You brought up the SEC and your interest in openness to that. What about the fact that if you did that, you would lose some of that national appeal that you would still have in the Big Ten now, with LA teams, Midwest, Chicago, South Bend, obviously, New York. So if you're in the SEC, does that affect your recruiting footprint because you're not hitting coast to coast anymore? Is that a part of your consideration of that or not?
Not really, quite frankly. Everything that I read and hear about is that the talent is moving to the South. And if you all of a sudden start saying kids from the South, because you're playing Alabama and Tennessee and Georgia, they say, hey, you know what? I want to break away from home. Maybe there's only one destination on the map, and that's South Bend, Indiana. Notre Dame is always going to draw kids from Los Angeles and Chicago and Boston anyway. It's a brand that kids are going to want to go to. But if we're right and people are moving out of the Rust Belt from Pennsylvania down to Florida, from Chicago down to Texas or wherever, some families would be like, hey, go back close to where we grew up. Our old neighborhood is, close to there. So we'd love to go visit back up in Indiana from time to time. So I think the key for Notre Dame is, no matter what, they have to, in order for them to draw Notre Dame fans back into the program, they're going to have to really win at a high level to keep that home field advantage. Because what I'm thinking is, if they're mediocre, if they're playing, say they're 7-4 and they're playing Michigan, well, guess who's going to buy those tickets? Michigan people are going to swoop in and buy those tickets. If it's if they're, say, hypothetically, they're 10-1 or whatever, Notre Dame fans are going to bail on that November 15th game because it's going to be cold. Notre Dame fans, just trust me, I go to all the games. The weather doesn't bother me, but it bothers a lot of people. And so when it's cold weather, and Notre Dame's not playing well, people are going to bail out, and they're going to say, hey, I live in Boston or Washington, D.C., and I've got season tickets, but I'm selling these tickets to the highest bidder for a game that I can't make it to, and I have no interest in going.
You know what? You have a really good point. There is nothing quite as depressing as pulling into Notre Dame on a Saturday morning in November, and you have 3 or 4 or 5 losses already. It's gray as can be, windy, cold, and you're sitting there all day, and everybody's like, are we having fun yet? You know, there's no excitement, no electricity. Half the people are miserable and cold, and it's like, there's nothing worse than that. At least if we're still playing for something, those games in November have a little kick to them when I'm over there.
Well, if they're playing for something, if they're playing for, if they're playing for first place in the conference against the Michigan State or something on November 15th, that's the advantage of being in a conference race. Then it's great. But if you're out of it, people aren't going to come from a long distance away. They're just not. I just know they're not. I know that.
Yeah, that's. It's a good point you bring up.
I was at many of those Jerry South games when they played South Carolina and LSU and schools like that, where you couldn't give the tickets away, and there were tons of empty seats in November. So I want to go back to those days. I think Freeman's doing a great job personally. I think if Notre Dame can somehow be a great program like they were during the Holtz 10-year run, let's say, then it will be an incredible environment to be at those games. My only issue still remains, can they bring their fans? Can they bring their own fans out on a Friday night, a Saturday night? We know Notre Dame's schedule right now. We can look at it and say, oh, they've got 2 night games and they got 5 starting times at 2:30 in the afternoon or whatever it is. Well, you cannot say that. You can go right now. Go look at the Wisconsin schedule. I'm not sure they have more than one Big Ten time determined at this point, and it's just because it's the first Big Ten game of the year for each school. But after that, I'm going to say TBA after every single game.
That's interesting. So you think that doesn't have the negative impact on conference teams because they're more locally regionalized fan bases, that it's easy to get there no matter what time?
Yeah, for sure.
So
if you're in Wisconsin,
right.
Yeah, that's my point. Is Notre Dame? These Notre Dame alumni bases are in Los Angeles and Phoenix and Boston.
Right.
Let's just admit it. They cannot all of a sudden turn on a dime and say, "Oh wow, I'm going to go to that game now against Indiana, for instance." And they announce that it's a night game on Friday night. There's going to be more Indiana fans there because they live in Indiana. It's like, like I said, the biggest feeder to Notre Dame is Chicago, but outside of that, you're talking Boston, New York, L.A., Phoenix, and these people are not going to be able to be coming to too many games, I don't think.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I'm telling you right now, Schwarbrick is definitely thinking, how can I get a schedule that Notre Dame fans can make it to their own home games from 600, 700, 800 miles away?
Now, I wonder how much of that can be leveraged by Jack in a negotiation. Like, would the Big Ten be open to that? Or are they going to say that's not fair, that you're saying you only want to play Saturdays and everybody else can't? Like, I wonder how much leeway in the negotiation there could be for that kind of discussion.
I don't see the Big Ten bending much on that, but I hope that if there's one thing that Notre Dame can do to pacify, that Schwarber can do to pacify his own small fan base locally, from the standpoint of getting to the games, we acknowledge they have a big fan base, but it's spread out throughout the country. So I think that Schwarbrick would have to consider the times of those games starting as one of the prime points that he has to make to the conference. I just don't see them bending on it. And if they do, it'll be for a very short period of time, 2-3 years. And after that, you're not getting that benefit any longer, I don't believe.
Here's the other question that I have about this, like your travel theory. Is the other way to look at it is, if you got to travel from Boston or New York or LA to come back to Notre Dame for a game, some people are saying in the chat, well, that means that you're going to be in town anyways because you're going to get there early. So what does it really matter to you what time the game is? Like, if I'm going there for a long weekend, I'm already going to go there. I'll be there. So what does it matter if it ends up being, but I guess it depends on your travel arrangements.
Well, I mean, I can tell you just from my own experience. Do you know, for instance, that the last 3 Notre Dame USC games didn't even sell out until the day of the game at home? It's because they have a smaller fan base. It's a dwindling fan base, and they're too far away, and they don't want to come to night games, basically. Not unless it's maybe one time a year. Like I was at the North Carolina game. There's a lot of empty seats at the North Carolina game this year. A lot.
Man, I can vouch for, I know a lot of people with season tickets. They're not even interested for a night home game because they tell me, John, by the time I get back to Chicago or the suburbs, it's like 1 a.m. I'm getting older. I don't feel like doing that. Like, that's a long day. You have the NBC broadcasts that are like 6 hours long. And I know a lot of people that are like, if it's a night game, John, do you want my tickets? Because I'm not willing to get home at 1 a.m.
Well, I still like going to the games, even though they are night games, because generally the night games, particularly the Southern Cal game, it's been a night game now for almost 20 times in a row, I'm going to say.
Yeah, and you're not going to miss that no matter what, if you get home late or not.
I don't miss that game. I don't miss that game unless I, completely out of commission. That's one I'll never miss.
Yeah.
But I am getting to the point in my life where, like, I do think, like, do I really want to be out until 1 o'clock in the morning, like you say?
Yeah.
But imagine if you were driving to Milwaukee. I mean, Chicago is not even a big deal. But if you were driving to Cleveland or Pittsburgh as a fan, cost of gas is up a lot. I don't know if you noticed. So there's factors that Swarbrick's going to have to take under consideration about the schedule, like a Thursday night game. Who's going to make it to a Thursday night game from, Nashville, or wherever they might come from? There'll be people there, don't get me wrong, but it'll be small. It'll be a lot smaller, than a Saturday afternoon game. I can guarantee you that. I didn't think of it this way. I'm glad you brought this to the table because it is something to consider. And I don't like that Thursday. I don't like that Thursday night. You expect me to have the stress of a Notre Dame game and go to work the next day? Come on. What are you doing to me? I'm just telling you, for instance, right now, just say for the sake of arguing, Wisconsin is scheduled to play at Notre Dame on a Saturday, even if it's a Saturday afternoon, but it's October 3rd, let's say. There's going to be a lot of Wisconsin fans coming to that game. There just are, because first of all, they haven't been there in forever. So it's a destination to come to Notre Dame. Every school will travel to Notre Dame, and that includes, we know, the SEC school. I just think at some point it would wear off on them. Like, hey, I'm a big, Alabama fan or Tennessee fan. We went there 2-3 years ago. There's really no need to return. But if you're local and you're at Indiana or Wisconsin or Iowa, you're still going to. Hey, do you remember when Nebraska came to Notre Dame when Davey was the coach?
Yep, and they took it over. And I was going to ask you if you were at the Georgia game, as the first Georgia game as well, because that was another one that looked kind of bad.
I was there.
What did you make of that takeover?
Well, there's a lot of factors involved in there.
2016 was the biggest factor, okay, to me, because people were still mad about 2016, saying I got to see it to believe it before I'm paying what you're asking to go sit there and watch that. I think 2016 was the reason for that.
In 2017, here's a big factor in why so many people came up from Georgia. They had a Cubs game on Friday to go to. Then they had the Notre Dame Georgia game, and the Atlanta Falcons were playing
the Bears.
At Soldier Field.
Yep.
So
I remember that too.
If you're a real sports fan, that's kind of like, well, we can go to Chicago and we can get 3 big games over the course of 3 days.
Yeah,
so that was the part of the.
Yeah, but I'm
here.
Go ahead.
If Georgia was to make the same trip back, say 2 years from now, they're not going to have 40,000 people there, because a lot of those people are going to say, well, we were just there in 2017, and it's expensive to do this, to continue to make that trip to Indiana is expensive. But, they'll still draw fans. There's no question. But I think at some point, those numbers will start to diminish from the visiting schools. I don't think they'll diminish from the Big Ten schools, just because it's easy to get from Wisconsin to Notre Dame or from Iowa to Notre Dame. That's my point. Same with Ohio State. We'll see what it looks like next year when Ohio State plays at Notre Dame.
Yeah, actually, that's going to be a really good test case for what that might look like. Yeah, you bring up some good points. I just don't think that's enough to deter this moving forward if that's where the truck's moving. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean, because I'm probably in the camp that I would prefer to see Notre Dame be in the Big Ten for one reason. It gives me an opportunity, like I said 5 minutes ago, I can still go to all the Notre Dame games because I'm a season ticket holder. And it will give me an opportunity to go to Champaign. I can go to Madison. I can go to Ann Arbor. I can go down to West Lafayette. I can go out to Iowa and see games. I may see 9 games in a season for all I know now. I'm not going to Rutgers and I'm not going to Penn State, but a lot of these places that I can drive to within, say, 3 hours, I'll be there. Definitely.
Yeah, you like to get there in person, man. You like to be where the action is.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well,
Awesome.
here's what we're going to do. Next time, I'll be at the first home game this year. Let's have a beer. We'll connect somehow, and I'd love to meet you.
Well, I'll be there, and I can guarantee you that Swarbrick is definitely taking this under consideration right now. If he hasn't already, he's got to consider the schedule that they play, when they play, and what time they start their games. He has to. Just has to.
Yep,
So,
and that would be interesting to see if that's something they can negotiate a little bit or get a little break on, or if it's non-negotiable. But that is a good point I didn't think of, so thanks for bringing it up.
All right, no problem. We'll see you.
Have a good evening. Thanks for calling. Take care.
All right, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
All right, folks. This has gone 2.5 hours. And I got some life to take care of here before the end of the night. So I thank everybody who's here, everybody who called, most of the people who commented, except for the spam porn ads and the people that were just trolling me to see me yell. Although I don't mind that. Mike Norris, you're still here. I appreciate Mike Norris. He's been trolling the whole time, but has been here the whole time. So I appreciate that. It's no fun if everybody agrees and we're all on the same page. I like seeing a little bit of this up in the mix. So thank you to everybody who interacted. If some news drops and Notre Dame does this, or Swarbrick has a press conference, whatever it is, as soon as I can, we will go live again. And I want you guys to call, tweet at me, call, put in the chat what's going on, what you think. So thanks for a fantastic show. I want to repeat, there is no show without you guys. There has to be some interaction for this all to work. So thank you guys. Have a good night. We'll talk to you on Twitter.